Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news and events across our divided states as well as across the surface of our divided globe. In the politically independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's go straight into the headlines here. We've got a big clip to play. We're going to go straight into it. First up in COVID news, the CDC COVID tracker updated last night at 7 p.m. reports U.S. total cases to be 17,974,303. Total deaths right now are 318,569 in the U.S., with 1,725 new deaths added to the count. On Tuesday night, President Trump won agreement with three of his biggest enemies. Those are House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, U.S. Rep. AOC, and U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders when he posted a video on Twitter slamming the $900 billion stimulus bill as a disgrace and called on lawmakers to amend the package. Let's listen to the whole clip here. Andre, let's play this clip from Trump, the 4-minute clip.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation in an effort to advance their extreme left-wing agenda and influence the election. Then, a few months ago, Congress started negotiations on a new package to get urgently needed help to the American people. It's taken forever. However, the bill they are now planning to send back to my desk is much different than anticipated. It really is a disgrace. For example, among the more than 5,000 pages in this bill, which nobody in Congress has read because of its length and complexity, it's called the COVID Relief Bill, but it has almost nothing to do with COVID. This bill contains $85.5 million for assistance to Cambodia, $134 million to Burma, $1.3 billion for Egypt and the Egyptian military, which will go out and buy almost exclusively Russian military equipment. $25 million for democracy and gender programs in Pakistan. $505 million to Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. $40 million for the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., which is not even open for business. $1 billion for the Smithsonian, and an additional $154 million for the National Gallery of Art. Likewise, these facilities are essentially not open. $7 million for reef fish management, $25 million to combat Asian carp, $2.5 million to count the number of amberjack fish in the Gulf of Mexico, a provision to promote the breeding of fish in federal hatcheries, $3 million in poultry production technology, $2 million to research the impact of down trees, $566 million for construction projects at the FBI. The bill also allows stimulus checks for the family members of illegal aliens, allowing them to get up to $1,800 each. This is far more than the Americans are given. Despite all of this wasteful spending and much more, the $900 billion package provides hardworking taxpayers with only $600 each in relief payments. And not enough money is given to small businesses, and in particular restaurants, whose owners have suffered so grievously. They were only given a deduction for others to use in business their restaurant for 2 years. This 2-year period must be withdrawn, which will allow the owners to obtain financing and get their restaurants back in condition. Congress can terminate it at a much later date, but 2 years is not acceptable. It's not enough. Congress found plenty of money for foreign countries, lobbyists, and special interests, while sending the bare minimum to the American people who need it. It wasn't their fault. It was China's fault, not their fault. I am asking Congress to amend this bill and increase the ridiculously low $600 to $2,000 or $4,000 for a couple. I'm also asking Congress to immediately get rid of the wasteful and unnecessary items from this legislation and to send me a suitable bill, or else the next administration will have to deliver a COVID relief package, and maybe that administration will be me, and we will get it done. Thank you very much.
Remarkable. I'm just going to briefly comment on that. Jamarl, what do you think?
He's right. He's right. In blunt commentary, he's right.
Very interesting. All right, you know what? Let's come back to this. We're undoubtedly going to be talking about this throughout the show. I'm going to go back to headlines for a minute, though. Pardons. Donald Trump has announced a wave of pardons yesterday to over a dozen individuals. This is ahead of his anticipated exit from the White House. The list of pardons includes ex-campaign aide George Papadopoulos. He was convicted during the Russiagate investigation for making false statements to the FBI. Alex van der Zwaan, also convicted during the investigation for making false statements to Robert Mueller. Former Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter, convicted of misusing more than $200,000 in campaign funds. Chris Collins, guilty of conspiracy to commit securities fraud. 4 Blackwater guards involved in a deadly shooting of Iraqi civilians. 2 Border Patrol agents involved in a shooting of an unarmed man. Alfonso Costa, a dentist who is convicted as guilty of healthcare fraud. Alfred Lee Crum, who was convicted of illegally distilling moonshine in 1952, a long time ago. Weldon Angelos, 55 years for selling marijuana and carrying a handgun. And Trump commuted the remaining prison term of former Representative Steve Stockman, who was convicted of 24 felonies, including fraud and money laundering. Notably absent from that list, of course, Julian Assange. It remains to be seen whether Trump will pardon him, although it's looking, chances are looking slimmer as we get closer and closer to Inauguration Day, especially after that long list of pardons. But we'll see. The city of Detroit has filed a lawsuit against Black Lives Matter activists, alleging a quote-unquote civil conspiracy and claiming the protests in the city, quote, have repeatedly turned violent, endangering the lives of police and the public, end quote. The city claims the activists participated in the conspiracy, quote-unquote, defamed the mayor and police, and contends that the city should be awarded damages. This is according to The Intercept reporting this story. The city cites 4 protests that occurred in the city this year and alleges that injuries to police officers included, quote, cracked vertebrae, lacerations, and concussions, end quote. In international news, the UN Security Council members have decided to end the joint UN African Union peacekeeping force in Sudan's Western Darfur region when the mission's mandate runs out on December 31st at the end of this year. This is after pressure from the country's transitional government, Russia, and other African nations. The council voted unanimously late Tuesday not to extend the mandate of the joint mission known as UNAMID. In June, the Security Council unanimously approved replacing it with a much smaller and solely political mission, which will be known as United Nations Integrated Transition Assistance Mission in Sudan, or UNITAMS. In India, an alliance of political parties in the Indian administered state of Kashmir, opposed to India's policies in the region, has won a majority of seats in local elections, the first since New Delhi revoked the disputed region's semi-autonomous state last year. People's Alliance for Gupkar Declaration, PAGD, which is pro-India but favors self-governance in Kashmir, won 112 of a total of 280 seats in District Development Council elections, which were held in a staggered 8-phase process from November 28th through December 19th. Israel's government collapsed yesterday, pushing the country into yet another early election. That's the 4th in just 2 years. The Israeli parliament dissolved itself at midnight on Tuesday. The move forced a new election after weeks of infighting and paralysis in the so-called unity government, a coalition sworn in just 7 months ago that paired Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's conservative Likud party with his main rival turned partner, Benny Gantz, of the centrist Blue and White Party. A new election must take place in 3 months and is scheduled right now for March 23rd of the coming year. Elon Musk has taken to Twitter to reveal that during the darkest days of the Model 3 program, that's Tesla's Model 3, he offered Apple CEO Tim Cook made an offer to Apple CEO Tim Cook to discuss the purchase of Tesla for 1/10 of its current value. Cook, however, refused to meet with him. This is on the tails of a headline that we were reporting yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, about Apple's Project Titan and how they have their own self-driving car program aimed at consumers. They're aiming for a passenger car consumer release by 2024. So within just a handful of years. Again, they've had this thing sort of fitfully going in fits and starts over the last couple of years. And again, apparently, Musk is now griping in some way, at least bringing these revelations to light. It's being painted as Musk griping, sort of, that, you know, when stuff was really rough, he brought it to Tim Cook. Cook didn't even meet with him to talk about it. And now, again, Tesla, 10 times the value that he'd pitched to them for the company back in those days. Anyway, last quick headline here. 3 skiers lost their lives to avalanches over the weekend during an especially dangerous period in Colorado's popular backcountry. On Sunday, the bodies of 2 backcountry skiers were recovered from an avalanche in the North San Juan zone after they were found buried in the snow. That's according to the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. Police identified the skiers as Albert Perry, who's 55 years old, and Dr. Jeff Paffendorf, 51 years old, both of Durango, Colorado, according to the San Juan County Office of Emergency Management Facebook page. They were reported overdue from their trip on Saturday, and that's when rescuers discovered what had happened. That is, an avalanche. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, so we have other headlines. A particular note, I would say, is the collapse of the Israeli government, you know, having to go back for another election pretty darn soon, the 4th in just a couple of years. But I think we're probably going to talk about the bill a little bit more. It's very interesting, you know, horseshoe theory sense, to see Donald Trump and AOC and Sanders agreeing wholeheartedly that the money included in this bill by centrist Republicans and Democrats is not enough for the American people. Don't you think, Jamarl?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump apparently had been talking about this bill prior, and the reports has it that he wanted $2,000 for each and every American. And his people, the people around him, basically tried to push him out of that idea, saying you're going to crash the negotiations if you push for that. Trump, being Trump, comes out and fights for America. That's a good thing.
It is. It's I just find it remarkable. Again, though, the horseshoe theory aspect of it, like you're saying, the story that came out last week was that his aides had sort of walked him back. They talked him down from a $2,000 stimulus check guarantee, which is, you know, a chunk of change. That's a bit more money than the $1,200 that was given out last year. And for a lot of that, I mean, I don't know exactly what it would take. Certainly $2,000 stretched over a almost year-long pandemic at this point isn't enough to salve the wounds the pandemic has created economically. But at the same time, that's, you know, more than 3 times more than was in the last bill. If that gets through, I think that's going to satisfy a lot of people. What do you think, Jamarl?
You already know my feelings about this bill. I think this bill is horrendous, and I think people should vote against this bill. And the only reason they're not voting against this bill is because basically Joe Biden told them not to. So I get that people need the money, but Pelosi didn't care whether people needed the money months ago. Why all of a sudden does she care now? Why all of a sudden does all of these Democrats care now? At the time, for months, none of them did. That's the question that people need to ask. Why all of a sudden, all of this impetus to get this thing passed at this very specific moment, when months ago, they didn't want to do it. Trump was offering $1.8 trillion, and they told him no. And so I really do think people need to wonder openly, opine, looking into the sky, why all of a sudden is the Democratic Party all on board with this very specific stimulus right now where they weren't before? That's what people need to ask. So,
you know, and I can give a. You know what? Maybe we should leave it as an open question. I have my own take, but maybe we can come back to that. In any event, we're going to close this segment out. We're going to be back on the other side of this break in just a minute with the Fault Lines Soapbox segment. You're going to hear what Jamarl has to say on his topic of choice. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, give us the like and share that audio or video. Also, make sure you're subscribed to whatever that audio or video is being played to you from. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can also send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Yesterday, I came on the channel and I made the point that the slap in the face stimulus that is being passed is indeed a slap in the face, hence the adjective in the beginning of it. We were told breathlessly that 1.8 trillion was insufficient. We were told this for months as businesses went belly up, as people stood in food banks, as people couldn't pay their rent. We were told that 1.8 trillion was insufficient. Nancy Pelosi wanted 2.2 trillion, not a penny less. And America demanded that Nancy Pelosi fight and stand strong for that $2.2 trillion. Donald Trump floundered, offered, frustrated, could not get it across the finish line. The moment Trump loses the race, all of a sudden, 1.8 is not only sufficient, 900 billion becomes perfectly adequate. Even when the left, by the way, who typically says, fight, 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 even when the left said, just dispense the money, people need it, retail is going belly up, 40% of those businesses have collapsed. Half of the businesses in your area, of the people in your area are like out of a job. Release the funds. This is the left. The left is usually screaming to fight. And even they said, enough. Give the money, 1.8 trillion, take it. Pelosi went on Wolf Blitzer, had a meltdown, pushing back on this notion that she was dithering while America burned, and that it must be $2 trillion. But now, 900 billion is sufficient. 900 billion is perfectly okay. And not just 900 billion is perfectly okay. All of the Democrats are amazingly on message for this. You didn't hear a peep out of them for the entirety of the negotiations for months on end. But now, all of them are on message. You don't think that's interesting? You don't think that's weird and peculiar that they fought for so many months for 1.8 trillion, then all of a sudden 900 billion is perfectly and entirely adequate? Mark Warner goes on television. Only people on the far left and far right have qualms with this slap in the face bill. Yeah. A bill that is supposed to be a stimulus to America, basically a bailout for America. Only people on the far left and far right have issues with this bill. 20, 30 million people are facing evictions? But yeah, just the far left and far right. This is an abject failure of the U.S. government. You even had Klobuchar, who's now also on message, go on and say this. She's on Rachel Maddow. Let's play the clip.
And now he's saying that he's going to veto it. There is some nuance to it with him saying that he wants a larger size payment to the American people, which is something that Democrats argue for at every step of the process. And now House Democrats say, okay, well, if that's what he wants, we'll provide him with that. I wonder just what you make of this very last minute scramble of what we thought was going to proceed here with this relief bill.
I kept thinking tonight, well, these pardons are an attack on our very democracy. This is an attack on every American. People who are struggling to get by right now, out of work, the unemployment is going to basically end the day after Christmas if this doesn't pass. People who are out of work,
Let's cut it here
people who need the help.
An attack giving two people $2,000 is tantamount to an attack on every American. Think about what she's saying for the moment. For months, Pelosi had no issue in holding this up. For months, people went belly up. People were in food banks. People were losing their cash. People were dying. People were in economic dire straits. Klobuchar never had this issue. But now that Trump wants to increase it to 2,000, all of a sudden she has qualms. All of the Democrats are on message. Let's hear Joe Biden. Let's hear Trump. Because I want to give you context. What Klobuchar is talking about as an attack on America. Let's hear Trump explain it in his own words. Let's play about a minute or two of this clip.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation in an effort to advance their extreme left-wing agenda and influence the election. Then, a few months ago, Congress started negotiations on a new package to get urgently needed help to the American people. It's taken forever. However, the bill they are now planning to send back to my desk is much different than anticipated. It really is a disgrace. For example, among the more than 5,000 pages in this bill, which nobody in Congress has read because of its length and complexity, it's called the COVID relief bill, but it has almost nothing to do with COVID. This bill contains $85.5 million for assistance to Cambodia, $134 million to Burma, $1.3 billion for Egypt and the Egyptian military, which will go out and buy almost exclusively Russian military equipment, $25 million for democracy and gender programs in Pakistan, $505 million to Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. $40 million for the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., which is not even open for business. $1 billion for the Smithsonian, and an additional $154 million for the National Gallery of Art. Likewise, these facilities are essentially not open. $7 million for reef fish management, $25 million to combat Asian carp, $2.5 million to count the number of amberjack fish in the Gulf of Mexico, a provision to promote the breeding of fish in federal hatcheries, $3 million in poultry production technology, $2 million to research the impact of down trees.
Let's stop here.
560.
Let's stop here. You get his point. You get his point. In a bill that is supposed to be a COVID relief bill, all of this pork, $600 to the American public, but all of this pork, billions of dollars for all of these other things that is not pertinent to the American public. Why does Congress, why does your government hate you so? Why are they okay with giving Wall Street all of this money, giving all of these pork benefits? But when it comes to bailing out actual Americans that make the society run, make the society go, no dice. And then we use the argument, oh, we got to get this done because Americans are hurt. They didn't care about this for months. They didn't care about it at all. So don't give me this nonsense argument now that you need to pass it when you didn't care about it for months on end. You can't turn around and act like you care so much when you didn't care much for the past several months. No, the honesty of it is Donald Trump is right. Donald Trump clearly has a point. Kennedy Center, $26 $26 million. Smithsonian, he went through those. Space Force, $2 billion. $1 billion for the wall. $500 million to Israel. By the way, they have universal health care and they have nuclear weapons. 120 billion tax breaks for business owners in the top 1%. 6.3 billion for tax breaks for martini lunch. That basically boils down to if you're in a business, you can dispense your lunches. So think for the moment that pretty much every lunch that a business owner has is going to get expensed and it's going to come back to them in regards to money at the end of the year. This is going to be billions in regards to money coming out of the Treasury, just for, again, plutocrats. 4.2 billion tax breaks for offshore tax scams. 2 billion, yes, like I said before, for Space Force. They even go so far as to drop in money to topple the government of Venezuela and even put into the bill how Belarus was a fraudulent election. All of this was supposed to be the COVID bill. This was supposed to be the stuff that was supposed to help America. Why is all of this in the bill? Why doesn't all of this pertain to Americans? Why are they only willing to give Americans $600? Why are they willing to give Wall Street so much money? Obama giving 95% of the income to the top 1%. And when you hit the skids, they don't care. Not even your Democrats, not even your representatives. Why are they also right now on the message that the paltry sum that they're giving you and all of this money that they're giving to these other venues is adequate and worth it now? When Nancy Pelosi said beforehand, twice as much was inadequate. New York Times, Mr. Biden's move wasn't without risk. If it had failed to affect discussions, the president-elect risked looking powerless to move Congress before he had taken the oath of office. But members of both parties said his intervention was constructive and gave Democrats confidence to pull back on their demands. Joe Biden basically contacted both sides and basically told them that half was adequate. The lack of money for America was entirely adequate. You voted for this guy unconditionally, and what I would point to you is for the next 4 years, get ready for disappointment. You put him in office, you voted for him, you had lefties tell you that he was going to back you in some particular way, and right now, this is the reality of it. Joe Biden is going to float in this kind of working with Republicans mindset, and you will be marginalized and put to the edges. Exactly what is taking place right now, exactly what is taking place in regards to the people he's putting in that position. Get ready for misery, 4 years of it, and keep it in your head. You voted for it. Shane, what do you think?
So we've only got like a minute left here. One quick clarification thing. This is a $900 billion COVID stimulus bill, like conjoined at the hip, apparently inseparably in almost 6,000 pages with a 1.4 trillion omnibus federal spending bill. So brief, it's technically not the same bill, which for many people would hopefully to resolve the uncertainty. They're left wondering, scratching their heads like, why are we funding Israel in our COVID stimulus bill? Why are all these other things being thrown in? Well,
those
both
are at the same time.
Yeah. They're both being passed at the same time, just as a sort of factual clarification there. Does that actually change anything substantive about what you're saying? I don't really think so. Any of the complaints that Trump was making, I don't think so. This isn't enough. And I think on the same night that Congress is passing this bill that clearly isn't enough for a lot of folks, they're also throwing away billions of dollars to arts programs and overseas political support, et cetera. It's a little bit shocking, except I don't think anybody's actually shocked. I think we're all just disappointed after so many years of disappointment and brief gradual shocks. Anyway, we have to go into a break. I just wanted to add that little thing in there. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this break talking with Ted Rall about this and more. I'm sure you're listening again to Fault Lines. Be back in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Rall. We are joined now by Ted Rall, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. His work you can find on his website, rall.com. Also check him out on Twitter at Ted Rall, R-A-L-L, by the way, T-E-D-R-L-L. Ted, thank you for being with us this morning. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. Well, I was looking forward to cashing my stimulus check, but I guess that's not going to happen probably.
It probably won't. So what do you think about, there's a weird case of horseshoe theory going on here, where Trump on the right, many would say on the far right, and AOC on the left, some would say on the far left, seem to agree that the $600 is not enough. Again, and then you have centrist Democrats, centrist Republicans who passed this bill mostly without complaint. What do you think about that $600 being multiplied by a little bit over, a factor of over 3 to $2,000? Would that be enough? What do you think about the idea of holding this bill up for that? Ted, what's your take?
I think I'm going to out AOC. I don't think the $2,000 would be enough. Certainly, obviously, it's much better than $600. The problem is that these are one-time payments. I mean, the last time that a U.S. citizen got a stimulus check of any kind post-pandemic was in June last year. Now, people have literally there's a lot of people who've lost their jobs and who've lost their supplemental unemployment benefits, and some people who never qualified for unemployment in the first place because they were self-employed or, whatever, owned their own small business. So people have been going out without completely. So even a $2,000 check one time isn't going to do the job. Bernie Sanders back in March or April had suggested $1,500, I believe it was, monthly. And I think, that certainly would be moving in the right direction. It needs to be an ongoing thing. I think that it would be better for the markets as well. They enjoy predictability. We need to get the money is the blood of the economy, and we need to get it flowing in to people's pockets so that they start spending again. We're going to come out in April or May. We're going to come out of lockdowns. Vaccines will have started to take effect. Businesses are going to be reopening as the weather warms up, and people need money in their pockets in order to be able to purchase goods and services from them.
Ted, what about this argument that Democrats and Republicans make about moral hazard? That basically, if you pay somebody's medical bill or pay somebody's school bill, let's say medical bill, that the person has a higher propensity to get COVID again, meaning the person is just going to go out, keep getting infected because they have all of this free health care that they could basically use. How do you feel about the Democratic argument that providing this stuff is somehow going to be a horrible thing? No, I mean, look, the one I want to get to is the way that they are perfectly willing to basically bail out Wall Street. Obama is perfectly willing to throw his body between the pitchforks. I remember the speech that Ted Kennedy gave where they was trying to increase minimum wage by like $2. And they kept putting all of these amendments on it in order to prevent it and hold it up for like months. And Ted Kennedy finally flips out and starts screaming to the mic, how much more greed is enough? It's like a phenomenal speech. But that's kind of what the headspace it puts me in. America took a hit through no fault of its own. The government failed to deal with a particular issue, meaning a health issue, focus more so on the economic aspect of it and end up failing on both. And now America has taken a hit from it. When they were willing to bail out businesses, bail out Wall Street, the world was great. But now when it comes to bailing out the American public, it gets a failure and a no. What do you think about it? The willingness to bail out all of these other sectors, the oligarchs of the economy, but moral hazard when it comes down to bailing out regular Americans?
Well, there's two economies. There's the economy that the three of us live in, that most Americans live in, and then there's the economy for the elites. For the elites, the stock market keeps booming, even while 20 million people lose their jobs. And for the rest of us, even if the stock market is going gangbusters like it was under Bill Clinton in the 90s, there's nothing but austerity. And when it comes to means testing and, it seems to apply to ordinary Americans, never to the 1% who, constantly keep getting bailed out. I mean, no one talked about moral hazard when the government bailed out the auto industry, not once, but twice, once in the 70s and once about 10 years ago. It's absurd. I mean, it's obvious that in an economy that is based 2/3 on consumer spending, consumers need money. And I guess if we want to have moral judgments about what people did wrong, although I don't really know what an individual did wrong with COVID, it was a government failing, as you say. We can have that discussion after we save the patient. But the country is teetering on the verge of collapse. And I just want to say, parenthetically, as someone who's had COVID, it is not really a good life choice to deliberately get it again in the hopes of coasting on that sweet, sweet free medical care.
And what do you think? I mean, I could see something like means testing. I mean, a lot of the debate specifically over the stimulus check seems to be that people, some substantial minority of the American public, people who get these checks, largely members of the middle class who haven't lost their jobs, are just going to deposit in their bank account or whatever. That's probably, frankly, what I would do. So why do you think we're not seeing more conversation about means testing for the stimulus check, itself, Ted?
Well, I mean, you can certainly, when the first round went out, I remember just being a little bit perplexed by the flatness of the $600 payments. And the explanation that was given was that the unemployment system in the various states were so antiquated that it wasn't possible to have them calculate a scale so that people who needed the money less would get less. They did do that with some of the flat payments. The original $1,200 checks were scaled based on the previous year's or 2 years taxes if you hadn't filed the previous year. But
I think it was there was some of that. It was a $75,000 AGI, like adjusted gross income cutoff, I think, or maybe you're right. It wasn't a cutoff. It was a sort of scaling back. But even that, for a lot of people, that seems like, a lot of people under that range, depending on where you live, depending on how high the cost of living is in the city that you're living in, even that is a decent amount of money, particularly if you still have a job. And I guess, I don't know, I don't want to make too much ado about nothing because, frankly, a lot of people could use more money, even if you're already secure. But yeah, that might simplify things slightly. Anyway, Ted, you were saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also we are in a country that has a dismal savings rate, in part because of Fed policy to keep interest rates low, and so I don't think it's real. It's almost like the flip side of the anti-welfare argument. Hey, let's not have a welfare system because some people cheat, even though 99% of people don't. Well, look, in this case, if some people get checked, don't really need it. That's okay. I mean, the important thing is to save as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. I mean, bills are coming due every single day. The rent and the mortgage comes due the first of every month. And the federal government it's like they're on another planet. They seem to think like, oh, we'll throw you a bone every 6 months. That's not going to help with the bank or with the landlord.
I mean, they are on another planet. All of these guys are rich. All of the people in the media are rich, meaning it doesn't dig into them. You know what I mean? It's like it's not that pressure of necessity that is on their backs constantly. They don't have this kind of ideological force that pushes them to do these things. And so for Pelosi, she would say $600 is great. For her, it doesn't dig into them. I really don't think it does. And even when you're looking at media, these guys are basically looking at this stuff through a glass where they are observing, but they don't necessarily feel it because they're not necessarily in it. I think that's the distinction. I think if people in Congress were more like people in the public, I don't think this would be a conversation we'd be having because they would already have pushed this stuff through. Their family members, the people who they care about, their mom, etc. All of those people would also be feeling the pressure and they would be obligated almost just from their bearings to do something more constructive. What do you think about that? Do you think it's this notion of a distinction in class that creates this lessening in regards to priority of the people in Congress? And if people were of a particular class, like some of the members that are going, I can't think of the gentleman's name, but he's a preacher. No. The other gentleman that won, African American, he won on the back of the Black Lives Matter movement. I can't think of his name. Bowman, I believe his name is. Well, again, he was like a teacher. The other woman is coming in. She was a waitress at Waffle House at one point. Like, I'm wondering if these people who are coming into Congress that were part of the society itself will be different just by virtue of their bearings. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and AOC was barkeep. There's definitely there's if you just Google a list of the net worths of members of Congress and the U.S. Senate, it is astonishing. There aren't very many who have net worths under $1 million, and many are worth a lot more. You mentioned Speaker Pelosi. I think last time I checked, she's worth $300 million. It's and she's had a long career in Congress. It's obviously, if she's ever had worries about making the bills, that's way back in the rearview mirror for her. It's not part of her reality. She doesn't know what it's like. And I guess, sometimes once in a blue moon, you get a wealthy politician like FDR who has that amazing sense of sympathy and empathy and is able to sort of grok what's happening out in the real world despite his privilege. But that's exceptional, and you can't look at exceptions. I agree with you. I think it's the same thing as with the media. I've been saying this for a long time. The media doesn't understand the concerns of the working class because they don't come from it. They used to. They used to be high school dropouts who started as stringers and worked their way up. Now you have to graduate from Columbia Journalism School, an institution that does not grant financial aid, which means that only wealthy kids graduate from it. And they're the people who are working at the New York Times and the Washington Post. So, I think the class consciousness is real part of this.
Yeah, there is the whole ivory tower phenomena going on. What do you think about UBI, Ted?
I'm definitely in favor of it. Anyone who's ever been to Alaska can tell you sort of, with the way they have the oil pipeline checks, can tell you that it's something that can really keep a society afloat. Look, this isn't a poor country. This isn't Vanuatu. The United States has massive, it's an engine of economic growth, and we're squandering hundreds of billions of dollars a year on the defense budget and other wasteful expenses. And I think a UBI is basic for a society that wants to say, look, every human being is entitled to, has worth. And, no one should be sleeping on the street because they literally don't have a single penny to their name. We can afford it. I think it would probably be very good for the consumer economy. It would be obviously the most progressive of all possible taxes because it would disproportionately assist the poor. And I think it means that we're all in it together, which is not currently the case.
I hear you on that one. I'm going to take us out and I'll let Jamarl bring us back. One controversial take that I haven't heard people say about UBI, at least it's controversial if you believe in UBI, is like while we're still doing the neoliberal thing, while we're still overthrowing other countries and then it's, having our corporations go in or our international bodies go in and either make them loans or buy up the resources, isn't UBI, wouldn't that be, if it were UBI for Americans and imperialism for everybody else, wouldn't that be a form of like global welfare for Americans? I think you get where I'm going with this. And I'm not, it doesn't have to be black and white. It doesn't have to be that dichotomous, but I could see that happening. And that's certainly one variant of it that seems like it would be very unhealthy in the long run. Not trying to paint with a broad brush here, but I could frankly see that happening. Anyway, I'll let Jamarl bring us back in, take it where he will. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be right back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines. Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby. Are
you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us, great conversation, Ted Rall, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You can follow Ted on Twitter at Ted Rall and read his cartoons and articles at rall.com. Ted, I'm going to give you a moment to respond to Shane's global welfare comment. I don't know. I love that. I'm going to give you a moment to respond to that. But I also want to get into this thing about class and the oddity of our world. We have a situation. James Baldwin made this comment, and I think it's called The Integrity of an Artist, where he makes this point about how pain is a uniting factor. Like, for all of the differences that we may consider that we have for each other, pain is a thing that unites. Meaning, you having a loved one to die. If I do, we get it. We understand it from the standpoint of pain. Not having the money to pay rent, not having healthcare, not knowing whether this kid is going to do well. Like, all of those things are difficulties of being a person, and all of those things, regardless of race, color, whatever, unites us as one. I watch DC Proud Boys fighting Antifa in the street with 3,000 people dropping dead. Now, whatever they think of one another, I would wager 1,000% that their class interests far exceeds whatever interests they have from the standpoint of hating one another. And yet, there they are in the streets fighting each other. I even wonder, when they get stabbed, do they have health care? Like, how does this work? Like, how does the mechanics of this work, where the public itself seems to be completely detached from the environmental circumstances to which these guys are unveiling themselves? It's almost like in the movies where the enemies, or where the protagonists and antagonists are fighting, like in a lava pit, and the train is, falling off the cliff and everything else, and these guys are still fighting. It puts me in mind of that. It feels like they missed the point. When the point, and look, I know points are not absolutes, but from the standpoint of the thing that gathers us and connects us, it seems that those things matter more than the things they quibble about. What do you think? Am I being too Pollyannish here in looking at this? Well, how do you see it?
You are being too Pollyannish, because this division has always occurred within the working class between people who are drawn to the left versus the right. But you're not wrong either. The class interests are obviously they do have pretty much the same class interest, and each of them see that the other side is being fooled. They're after different things. The left is after a communitarian view of the world that looks out for people and cares about each individual and works collectively toward that, whereas the right is after a sense of greatness and a sense of nationhood and sort of bonding over blood and soil that is that doesn't really put any money in their pockets, but something that they're proud of and value. Getting back to the argument about sort of global transfer of wealth to the United States, if U.S. imperialism was a net positive in terms of cash flow, that the UBI would actually totally have that same exact role the way it did in the Roman Empire, where wealth was being sucked from the periphery, from the colonies, into the glorious center of the empire. But I don't think that's the case. I mean, someone's going to have to do that analysis. But toward the end of the height of the British Empire, in the mid-20th century, before India was granted independence, bean counters in Britain calculated that British imperialism really was a net negative. Maintaining the supply lines, sending the troops, training the troops, feeding them, sending them all over the place. All those wars were costing the Brits a ton more than they were sucking out of their colonies. And I think that's still true. I think that's true for us. It's got to be true. It's so expensive in terms of blood and treasure. You must tell the rest of the world what to do. I sincerely doubt we're getting that much out of it. I mean, think about oil wars. It's not like we even get oil at a discount after we invade and occupy an oil-producing country. France gets their oil at the same exact price as we do without having invaded Iraq. So it's I think the UBI is safe morally from that, but I would definitely love to see someone crunch those numbers.
That would be interesting. And frankly, that should be done regardless. That's. I think that at this point, one can also make the argument, and I haven't done the research, but what could make the argument that earlier on it was more profitable for the British Empire, and then it sort of cyclically reached a point where it stopped being that way, and of course that preceded the era of decolonization by the Brits, at least nominally. And I would hope that we've passed that point if we ever were in the net positive. America. I would hope that we pass that point and we'll soon start the whole retrenchment process. Anyway, I was admittedly coming out of left field. That was a curveball I was trying to throw into the conversation. I think the class conversation that you guys were having earlier, specifically this idea of not necessarily it is an economic class, but it's really just it's also a social class, a political class. It seems like there is a continuum of political interest between a vast majority of politicians in Congress. There's a sort of a populist argument that you can make here. The vast majority of politicians in Congress, the vast majority of graduates of certain prestigious universities, your standard sort of core, Yale, Harvard, Stanford. You can start to expand it from there, Princeton, Dartmouth, et cetera, whatever. Keep going. There's a continuum of political interest that, as far as I can tell, it does dominate a lot of the fields of human leadership and thought, and populates the military-industrial complex, populates the various think tanks that lead us. But isn't that? I start to get into that stuff, and like I was saying, there's a populist argument that immediately comes to the fore there. What degree of credit would you give to the idea that there is an independent class from the body of the American people, represented by the graduates of the Ivy League universities? And how much of that is real? How much of that is important to focus on, Ted? And how much of that do you think is just a sort of a more right-wing, arguably a more right-wing populist boogeyman, frankly? Ted, what's your take?
I think it's a real thing. And, I was a scholarship kid at an Ivy League school. So I really got to see this up close and personal. The kids who had been fed in from elite prep schools like, Phillips Andover and Choate, in Exeter, these places that were, it was just like a complete, even within I'd gotten into the same school as them, we were living completely different lives. They had never worked a day in their life. I was working 3 jobs to get through college. And you could just see how everything was going to be greased for them. And it was just, it's a class. It's almost like how you see CEOs bounce from a cereal company to heading a car company to heading a tech company. And you're thinking, well, how does this cereal guy know how to run a tech company? And the answer is he doesn't. It's just that he's part of the CEO class, and he's sort of, his future is assured, and he will always, membership will always have its privileges. And so I think we are governed by this sort of set of elites, and it's an American aristocracy. And so I'm highly sympathetic to the populist argument that these systems need to be broken down and attacked at the root. But of course, nothing short of revolution is going to accomplish that. But that's what I would like to see happen.
It's funny. There's 2 areas I can go with this. And I slightly giggled when Shane asked the global question, but in retrospect, I shouldn't have giggled because I think Shane has a point. Maybe not necessarily from the global part, but definitely from the part of whether or not the UBI is a bribe. Now, the reason I say that is because ultimately, if you are getting, let's say a UBI, let's say you're getting a monthly UBI, which I agree with. I think people should get it just as virtue of being an American, richest country on the planet, all of the oil wealth, all of the things they pull out the ground. There should be something that the public gets back for that. That's what I think. And it should be one of those things that the public understands almost in the way it understands Social Security. This is mine. I owe, like, this is what I'm owed just as being in America, kind of like in Alaska. But is there something to be said if the people are getting a UBI, but the jobs are going? And meaning it's not a situation where people own the means of production. They don't own the materials to which they work with. Ultimately, they get a wage and they get basically a bribe to leave the wealth and the oligarchs to their devices. Is there something to be said for that? Meaning, look, we're not going to give up controls of the mechanisms of production. You guys aren't going to get that. But we will give you $100 so you can leave us to our devices. That doesn't seem positive. That seems horrible. Like, that seems like it gets so dystopian as more and more jobs bleed away and as people get more and more reliant and dependent upon something like a UBI to keep them afloat. Like I said, I agree with it on basics, on premise, but I also agree with this notion that until people own the means of production, this doesn't change. I mean, the dynamics of our society basically stay as is. What do you think about that? We have about 3 minutes.
Well, I think that you have to sort of, if you favor revolutionary change, as I think we do, I certainly do, a universal basic income is a method of propping up an existing system, as you point out, that I would like to see collapse. And it's true that it's like Sartre said, until the revolution comes, however, you can't live as if the revolution had occurred. And so, one would, if you're trying to bring about revolution, I suppose what you want to do is make everyone's lives as miserable as possible, so that eventually they're poor and they're so angry that they overthrow the state, and then we establish socialism. Awesome, but until then, we are stuck with reality of everyday life, and we don't want people to be miserable because we're humanists. So it's true that I think a UBI kind of serves the capitalist system, especially at a time with increased efficiency of technology and AI and all this. Basically means they don't need us anymore, right? I mean, it's like the truth is we don't need every American to work 40 hours a week anymore in order to produce the same amount of goods and services. The fact is they don't. Many people should be paid and I'm saying this from the standpoint of a capitalist. They should be paid to sit at home and watch TV and drink beer so that they don't overthrow rich oligarchs who are running everything. So you're right. I think absolutely, not just in theory, but a UBI props up a hateful system of gangster capitalism. But at the same time, that's the system that we have for now, and you kind of want it to be as humane as possible. I mean, at that rate, you could say the same thing about Medicare for all would have a similar function. Any kind of social safety net program, free college, student loan forgiveness, would all have that effect.
And you know what? I'm going to go back. We close it out here, Ted. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We just have less than a minute left, and I wanted to make my point, but didn't want to push us up too far into the break. Anyway, Ted Rall, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You can follow Ted on Twitter at Ted Rall and read his cartoons and articles at rall.com. That's RALL.com. I've been thinking about, this sort of dynamic of the level of force, the asymmetry of force, the asymmetry really of the quality of weapons throughout history, where different authors have looked at, say when you had knights and castles, there was an intense asymmetry of power between the public at large, or just people, your average person, and the ruling class, your average aristocrat. With the invention of the barreled rifle, with the invention of the Winchester, for instance, that changed. And there's this question about where we are today. And, on the one hand, we got to close this out. On the one hand, you got massive air forces, naval forces. On the other hand, you have drones. And I'm kind of, I don't know, it's a little bit dangerous to look at things this way potentially, but I don't know how that's going to affect that asymmetry going into the future. We'll come back to this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be right back on the other side of this break.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system. Your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, rushing things where they shouldn't be rushed, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, we're sending quick messages back and forth at the last minute trying to pull this stuff together. All right, let's go to the headlines. In the news, the CDC COVID tracker updated last night at 7 p.m. reports U.S. total cases to be 17,900,074, 303 total deaths, 318,569 I said that wrong. The CDC COVID tracker, updated last night at 7 p.m., reports U.S. total cases to be 17,974,303. The total deaths being 318,569, with 1,725 new deaths added to the count. On Tuesday night, President Donald Trump went in agreement with three of his biggest enemies: House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, U.S. Representative AOC, and U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, when he posted a video on Twitter slamming the $900 stimulus as a disgrace and called on lawmakers to amend the package. Let's play this clip. This clip is about 4 minutes long, so let's play the clip.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation in an effort to advance their extreme left-wing agenda and influence the election. Then, a few months ago, Congress started negotiations on a new package to get urgently needed help to the American people. It's taken forever. However, the bill they are now planning to send back to my desk is much different than anticipated. It really is a disgrace. For example, among the more than 5,000 pages in this bill, which nobody in Congress has read because of its length and complexity, it's called the COVID Relief Bill, but it has almost nothing to do with COVID. This bill contains $85.5 million for assistance to Cambodia, $134 million to Burma, $1.3 billion for Egypt and the Egyptian military, which will go out and buy almost exclusively Russian military equipment, $25 million for democracy and gender programs in Pakistan, $505 million to Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama, $40 million for the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., which is not even open for business, $1 billion for the Smithsonian, and an additional $154 million for the National Gallery of Art. Likewise, these facilities are essentially not open. $7 million for reef fish management, $25 million to combat Asian carp, $2.5 million to count the number of amberjack fish in the Gulf of Mexico, a provision to promote the breeding of fish in federal hatcheries, $3 million in poultry production technology, $2 million to research the impact of down trees, $566 million for construction projects at the FBI. The bill also allows stimulus checks for the family members of illegal aliens, allowing them to get up to $1,800 each. This is far more than the Americans are given. Despite all of this wasteful spending and much more, the $900 billion package provides hardworking taxpayers with only $600 each in relief payments, and not enough money is given to small businesses, and in particular restaurants, whose owners have suffered so grievously. They were only given a deduction for others to use in business their restaurant for 2 years. This 2-year period must be withdrawn, which will allow the owners to obtain financing and get their restaurants back in condition. Congress can terminate it at a much later date, but 2 years is not acceptable. It's not enough. Congress found plenty of money for foreign countries, lobbyists, and special interests, while sending the bare minimum to the American people who need it. It wasn't their fault. It was China's fault, not their fault. I am asking Congress to amend this bill and increase the ridiculously low $600 to $2,000 or $4,000 for a couple. I'm also asking Congress to immediately get rid of the wasteful and unnecessary items from this legislation and to send me a suitable bill, or else the next administration will have to deliver a COVID relief package, and maybe that administration will be me, and we will get it done. Thank you very much.
That administration will not be Trump, decidedly so. But nevertheless, Donald Trump has a complete and entire point. Shane, you didn't get a chance to give your full-throated rebuttal in the last segment. So I'm going to take 2 or 3 minutes now. We have time to go through the rest of the headlines.
It's not a rebuttal. No,
it's not a rebuttal, but you know what I mean. Just your response.
Just
I always like you to get their response. Yeah.
It's a kind of a confusing broader point. There's this idea when you're looking at civilizations where the level of asymmetry and force between the elites and between the public is one determinant of the level of inequity in society. So in other words, when you have knights and castles under feudalism, there's a high capital input. It takes a lot of energy to not only to build castles with the level of technology they have, but that's something that itself creates a sort of political hierarchy. Now you compare that to mid-19th century America, where with the Winchester rifle specifically, with the advent of cheap, widely available guns that basically brought everybody down to the same level. You had artillery, but really that was the only level above guns that was available. Pretty much everybody was on the same level, and you had democracy broadly. You had, still a hierarchy definitely, but a much flatter hierarchy than you had under feudalism. Now, in the modern era, we have, if you look at what defines force, in large part, it's like aircraft and massive naval craft, not massive naval vessels. And so on the one hand, yes, that would create an intense hierarchy. On the other hand, what we see happening is the rise of drones, like the rise of automated, self-flying, relatively cheap drones that, even though they're still, the Predator drones are expensive, we still haven't seen, and this is like a grim opportunity, sad to say, for terrorism and just for insurgent groups in general, but also as a leveling force, cheap drones. I still don't think that we have fully realized where that's going to go. And widely distributed, widely available artificial intelligence, automated force by those drones, I could see that going in a number of directions, but I could potentially see that being leveling. And so on the one hand, we were talking about universal basic income. On the one hand, you were talking about it as a bribe, where it's basically keeping people docile. We're also talking about how people are getting displaced and how people are being outmoded by automation effectively. That drives down the value of labor, which is really another way of saying it drives down the value of a human being in an economic sense. It's this weird nonlinear system of multiple interacting forces, and I don't know how it's going to go, but the jury is not out. It is not whether or not we'll be able to get through this with some sense of humanity intact. It's a much larger conversation than 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm really struggling to fit it all in, but that's the kind of the gist of it.
No,
those two.
That makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah. Basically, at one point, your society hits, I guess, leveling off points. And, maybe it sounds like you're talking about change. Like, how does your society change? And, with all of these interacting forces that are basically interlaced in that society, where does it go? And does that get bad? Meaning, like, if the public itself rebels and the public has access to drones and AI and all of this other technology, is that a leveling off force against the government? That's what it sounds like you're arguing. Yeah.
That's where I'm going. Yeah, because on the other hand, what you were talking about with people being automated away, basically the value of their jobs, people getting fired and having robots replace them is the simplest way to put that. That would lead to intense hierarchy. That would lead to a very vertical hierarchy where a lot of people are simply unnecessary, and a relatively small number of people can, with the help of AI, with the help of robotics, et cetera, however that looks, can control much of the world's resources with little need for a satisfied public. So a UBA might not even be necessary at that point. But on the other hand, you have, like we're talking about with drones, with widely accessible like malware and technologies like that, it's two potentially inverted incentives, if that makes sense. It's admittedly pretty confusing.
I do think it makes sense. I mean, especially from this notion of what happens if it does get bad. Meaning, where's the level where it becomes painful, too much more painful to not act than it is to act. And I think that's where things get dangerous. You either have a left-wing option where the public can be a populist and try to give that money back, the saving of capitalism, as the FDR said, or you have a right-wing option, which goes into this kind of fascist repression of the country. And I honestly do believe that you can look at Trump and some of the things Donald Trump was trying to do and kind of see where that can go from. Donald Trump didn't have the institutional support to do stuff like this, but what if he did? Like, what if he did have those people who was like, yeah, who's cheated? Yeah, we should send the military into those places. What happened if that was the prevailing point of view? Because I have to be honest, it could have been the prevailing point of view. So I don't, dodge the bullet, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, Shane, this could have gotten bad. That's my point of view. Look, I don't think that there is a God above that protects America. I don't think it works that way. I think we're all susceptible. I think we all can fail. I think we're all, for the most part, dancing on the head of a knife. And from the standpoint of a democratic or representative system, I think we are very cavalier about how fragile that is and how that can be broken. And these guys play around with that, and the things that they do, and the party structure itself being more important than America. I mean, even the stimulus bill is a good example from my standpoint. I mean, at some point, it looks like the public would have to get to the point of saying, enough, I'm done. I don't know where that point is. And it sounds like, I think from your standpoint, it's like, where does the public go at that point and what happens? I think that's an interesting question. So yeah, I don't, you're sometimes you undermine yourself when I don't think you should, because you are making sense. So, don't do that.
Maybe I shouldn't listen to people in the chat room who are like, this guy is not making any sense.
No, you shouldn't.
What the heck are you talking about?
As an absolute, you shouldn't. And I don't mean to, attack anybody in the chat. It's not like that. It's just that you are awash in opinions. There are going to be a billion opinions for any and everything that happens. Some of these people are lunatics. Some of these people are quite bright. Some of these people you'd be falling in line with. And so at that point, you almost have to create a shell around yourself in regards to holding your particular point of view. There could be 100 people. Do you think you're right? If you think you're right, go with it. If you think you're wrong or you think they have a point, okay, adjust it. But no, don't do that. Don't undermine yourself like that. Let's go back to the headlines. Donald Trump announced a wave of pardons on Tuesday to over a dozen individuals ahead of the anticipated exit from the White House. The list includes ex-campaign aide George Papadopoulos, convicted during Russiagate investigation for making false statements to the FBI, Alexander van der Zaan, also convicted during the Russiagate investigation for making false statements to Robert Mueller. Former Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter, convicted of misusing more than $200,000 in campaign funds. Chris Collins, guilty of a conspiracy to commit securities fraud. 4 Blackwater guards involved in deadly shootings in Iraq of Iraqi civilians. 2 border control agents involved in shootings of an unarmed man. Alfonso Costa, a dentist guilty of healthcare fraud. Alfred Lee Crum, illegally distilling of moonshine in 1952. Weldon Angelos, 55 years for selling marijuana and carrying a handgun, and commuted the remaining prison term of former Representative Steve Stockman, convicted of 24 felonies, including fraud and money laundering. And just one last one. Detroit filed a lawsuit against Black Lives Matter activists alleging a civil conspiracy and claiming the protests in the city have repeatedly turned violent, endangering the lives of police and the public. The city claims the activists participated in the conspiracy, defamed the mayor and police, and contends that the city should be awarded damages, The Intercept reported. The city cites 4 protests that occurred in the city last year and alleges that the injuries to police officers included a cracked vertebrae, lacerations, concussions. And according to the report, you guys are listening to, those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Wow. Yeah, let's go into a break. You guys are listening to you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment. In fact, the open segment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back, and you heard that right. We are taking calls. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. That's myself and my co-host. And we are taking your calls. The phone lines are open, 202-521-1320. That's the number you should call if you want to call and speak with us and our audience transitively. Again, that's 202-521-1320. Interesting conversations this morning. We're going to be joined, by the way, by Maram Sousli. We plan to be joined by Maram Sousli next segment and the segment after that, talking about Julian Assange and more. And interesting conversation earlier on with Ted Rall. We take things in strange directions sometimes, Jamarl. We went from, if I'm going to go back over this correctly, we started out talking about the stimulus bill and like a horseshoe effect or something like that, horseshoe theory with Donald Trump siding with lefties in Congress. And we started talking about universal basic income and class and the ivory tower and whether that's like a useful category. And then we came back to universal basic income, whether that's like a tool for imperialism or it could be. We kind of went all over the place, man. But I think those are often good conversations. In any event, we are taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. We've got a couple of callers on our line, but you can join them if you want to. Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on. What's going on?
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank y'all for taking my call. Hashtag Trump 2K, hashtag stimulus checks. Pardon Julian Assange. I know I'm going to say this over and over again. Pardon Julian Assange and other whistleblowers that helped WikiLeaks, that did the right thing to save humanity. Look into my case, Google whistleblower Tariq Simon. Look into my case. In all walls, in poverty, and continue to do the right thing that we have to do. We have to declassify everything. John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, declassify it all. We don't know if Trump gonna stay in or he's gonna have to leave. We don't know. He might as well just declassify everything, and we take it from now, the public. You know what I'm saying? It's upon us to stand up for our rights, our human rights, and to demand Medicare for all, to demand to end all walls, end poverty, end homelessness, help out our vets, help out our citizens, help out people, and stop getting involved with everybody else's business. That's all I wanted to say.
Tarif, Thank you for saying that. That is a utopian, that's an uplifting and an optimistic message to be spreading, and I like it. So thank you for calling in to say that. We're taking calls, 202-521-1320. I certainly do hope, also, we talked about this earlier, Trump, with that wave of pardons, about a dozen pardons that he released yesterday, not included on that list, Julian Assange, sadly, hope that name is included on a future pardon list within the next couple of weeks, although I'm a little bit doubtful as we get closer and closer to the date. But who knows? We'll see. Trump likes to flip-flop in this stuff and sort of troll the media. He's done that before, certainly. Anyway, 202-521-1320 is the number to call. We have Michael calling in from Sydney, Australia. Michael, thank you for the call. You're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, guys. I was listening to Jamal's monologue about the Democratic pardon and Biden and the Trump speech and everything. And I just think, like, it's a real shame that, like, Donald Trump, like, sort of ripped the face off, like, of the Republican Party just by his nomination and his winning the election and just his racism and misogynism and all that type of stuff. But it's a real shame he didn't really get the opportunity to rip the face off, like, all the corruption in the Democratic Party and all the Russia gating and all that stuff that went on under Hillary Clinton, and all that whole conspiracy theory against him and the rigging of the election against Bernie Sanders and I actually stand on the side of Donald Trump. I mean, like, I actually believe, like, in this last election, that this postal vote was, like, to a large extent, I actually believe a lot of it was, like, fraud. I'm not saying he would have won outright or anything, but it would have been a lot closer. And he possibly could have won those appeals if he, if basically, like, the system wasn't against him. All those judges are owned by the CIA. They're probably all clients of Epstein anyway. So, I mean, like, I just think it's a real shame he didn't get to rip the face off the Democratic Party and expose it. I mean, he did expose it under Hillary Clinton and showing her up for what she was by just beating her and showing how unpopular they were and how touched they were with the general public. But it's a real shame. And I think he's got a lot of good points in that speech about, all that money, especially the last one. One of the main points he made is, I'm pro-migration, but why are immigrants getting $1,800 when the average American's only getting $800, $600, whatever it is? It's just a joke.
1,000% agree with you. I mean, it really is. I mean, this bill should have been uber focused on the American public. It should have dealt with the healthcare costs. It should have dealt. I mean, for God's sake, they're calling it the COVID relief bill, right? What is the relief if 17 million people, 18 million people have been infected with COVID? Nearly 400,000 people have died. How do you not deal with healthcare in this? And it's not even the fault of the individuals that got sick. It's the government and its malfeasance in doing something, meaning businesses were shut down, people got sick, not through fault of their own. Yes, some people might have not worn masks and everything else, but we're talking about a large failure from the standpoint top down. And many of the people who got sick did so because of that failure. Meaning you don't get these numbers like that without the government completely and entirely failing at its job. And yet the people themselves are going to be stuck with the medical bills, the illness, the financial crisis of their businesses and retail being imploding. Yeah, I agree with you entirely. I mean, it's abysmal. Shane, finish your point earlier that you were making on the monologue. I mean, it didn't sound like you disagree, but it sounded like you were going to expand further into the reasons as to why you think these guys all of a sudden have this impetus now going beyond just Joe Biden telling them that it's okay.
It's because he won. It's because Joe Biden, as far as they're concerned, at least, by all appearances, are not really trying to seriously dispute this right now. Joe Biden won the election, and they want his first months to be relatively cozy and rosy so that, he can use the first year of his presidency to good effect and make it more likely that either he or another Democrat will be elected in future presidencies and in future years, So they're trying to create, as far as I'm concerned, that's exactly what's going on. That's why she was trying to make Trump's life so heinous, was not just so that he would not get reelected, but so there would be a contrast between the last months of Trump's presidency and the first months of Biden's presidency. And as Biden entered the office, people are getting checks. Things are a little bit more flush, and they can use that to get reelected, to get more money effectively in the long run. That's my take. I think that's why they're sort of all just throwing in with it right now. and literally criticizing Trump for doing exactly the same thing that Pelosi was doing when she was pushing for more money instead of signing on to a smaller bill. And that's exactly what Trump is doing with the $2,000 stimulus checks. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And Klobuchar, though, said that that's attacking America. Giving America, fighting for America for $2,000 is attacking America. It's Orwellian. It really is.
That's incredible. Mental flexibility. Those are mental gymnastics, the likes of which America only rarely sees.
Yeah. I mean, and there's not even a shadow of embarrassment or humiliation by it. I mean, like, I really wish Donald Trump makes a campaign video showing Nancy Pelosi fighting on Wolf Blitzer, then showing her immediately fighting, saying that the money, $900 is enough. That's what I want to see. Because those clips are out there, right? Where Nancy Pelosi is fighting, saying, no, Wolf Blitzer, 2.2 trillion, this is all we can tolerate. And then you have her fighting with the press saying, no, 900 billion is great. And the press is like, well, wait a minute, you were against this a while ago. Those are great videos because it makes it look like she's lost her mind. Whoa, Klobuchar has lost her mind. Mark Warner has lost his mind. Why are all these people all of a sudden okay with it on a dime? A 6,000-page bill that they had 2 hours to read. Why are they all on board for this like this? I mean, like, it really is obscene. They didn't read this bill. They didn't read this bill, like real terms. They put out a 6,000-page bill. In this bill is like Belarus, that the election was fraudulent. Why are you putting that in the bill? Like, why is that there? Like, even if it's in an omnibus bill, you're passing all of this stuff at the exact same time. Why is that in a bill? I mean, it's just the stuff that they put in. The money for Venezuela at the top of the government. Why are you putting that in the bill? Like, they're putting that in writing. The COVID-19 is like wiping through your population. And in their heads, they're writing a bill, supposedly, to deal with the COVID stuff. And they're adding an omnibus bill at pretty much the exact same time, showing, this idea of priorities. The American public is just not a priority. And I think the American public needs to come to terms with that and ask itself, why? Why do they treat you so? Why do they not care about you so? Why, is this always a fight just for the most basic of things? It's horrendous. We have a caller, Black Sheep. Black Sheep, I love that. Black Sheep from Texas. What's going on, man?
How's it going, brother? Good to hear from you on the morning. I have an idea I wanted to kind of float to you all. Actually, there's a question. What do you all think of as far as the left goes, liberals? And when I say liberals, I mean kind of the AOC, TYT, Sam Cedar crowd, that side of the left. I have a theory that the reason why, especially, and this is being the prevailing side of Democrats, the reason why they don't fight is because they've never had to fight, like, in life. Like, you know what I mean? Like, never had to, they wouldn't bust a grape in a fruit fight. So why would we expect these people to actually fight for us when they've never had to fight anything? And along with that, if you think about the concept of all of them, they've never been wrong, right? They're all perfect. They've never had racist thoughts in their mind, is what I mean when I say that. They've never, you know what I mean? They're always been on the right side of history. They've always been on the right side in their mind, right? They're always in the right. So, I think having those people in positions of power and for us, it leaves out people like me who definitely ain't always been in the right, but I've been able to get that side of life and see, I can relate to a racist because I fucked up, badly in myself. So, that's kind of the idea I wanted to kind of get across.
Yeah, you can't. Just real quick, Black Sheep, you curse there. You can't do that. We're on radio, FCC. You're okay.
Really sorry.
No, you're fine.
It's all right, man.
But let me ask you a question, though. The comfortable, I call them the comfortable left or the privileged left. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, for whatever reason, they would parrot the name of the stuff. Yes, we're for Medicare for all. Yes, we're for this. Yes, we're for that. But they will also say, vote Biden, vote Clinton. Russiagate is entirely real. Oh, throw your bodies. Cenk Uygur was like, you must throw your bodies into the streets if he tries to get rid of Mueller. Like, this nonsense. But when he gets to fighting for Medicare for all, doesn't come up. Not that big of an issue. Uygur had went so far, TYT, that Putin is controlling Donald Trump. Even now he believes it. After all of the lawsuits, after all of the failures, after all of that stuff, even now he would say it's true. Yeah, MSNBC. Sam Cedar works with MSNBC. In my head, I think ideologically they just agree with the Democratic Party. And that for the most part, they're comfortable in their privilege in a way that they don't necessarily, where it doesn't dig into them. That's what I think. And so it's not that I think they're ideologically different. I think they just have a different idea in regards to articulating that stuff. And they tend to err on the side of Democratic Party. And I think that's unfortunate. That's what we've done for the last 40, 50 years, and it has not served us well. Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Susli. We are joined by Maram Susli, political commentator, geopolitical analyst, and chemist. And by the way, you can follow Maram on Facebook and Twitter at Partisan Girl. Find her on YouTube by searching for Syrian Girl Partisan and support her on Patreon at patreon.com/Syrian Girl. Maram, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you guys?
Good. Although I realize I misspoke. It is not morning your time. You're on the other side of the world. You're still in Australia, right?
Exactly. It's about 13 hours difference between us right now. So basically, I'm on exactly the opposite end of the world.
There you go. There you go. All right, let's get into it. Again, Maram, thank you for being with us. As I said, she is a political commentator. We're going to commentate on politics here, specifically on Donald Trump and Julian Assange. Julian Assange still in captivity in Belmarsh. Last we heard a couple of weeks ago, COVID was circulating in the sort of in the prison where he was being held, particularly in his cell block. Haven't heard more on that since then, but I'm assuming that he has not caught it. Still in pretty bad health, though. That's the sort of state of physical affairs where Assange is concerned. Legally, in recent weeks, there has been a rumor circulating, I guess it amounts to that at this point, that Trump is strongly considering a pardon for Assange. Now, yesterday, Trump went ahead and pardoned about a dozen people. Assange was not on that list. I'm going to hand it over to you, Maram. Do you see this happening in the next couple of weeks? Do you think there's any chance, or is it too late? What's your take?
You know, Trump is extremely unpredictable, but he has ample opportunity to pardon Assange. He has no reason not to pardon him. He has nothing to lose. And yet, I just think that he also has nothing to gain. The thing is that this guy is completely self-serving at the end of the day. And Biden is worse because he's serving not himself, but something worse than himself, likely. But Trump has shown cowardice every step of the way when it comes to fighting the deep state. And at the end of the day, it was under Trump that Assange was thrown into Belmarsh. And Sheldon Adelson, Trump's biggest donor, was also behind spying on him. So I don't have high hopes for Assange's pardon by Trump. But I do support pushing and asking Trump to do it, to apply a pressure campaign and bring highlighting attention. And at the end of the day, I don't think we should rely on the pardon alone. We should be more proactive and, campaign further.
The Trump thing is interesting. When they first started going after Julian Assange, under the Obama administration, Obama thought that it would be too much of a jump of the shark. That basically the media and everyone else would be potential on the chopping block. that the moment that you go after Assange, you're basically going after a publisher. And the difference between, let's say, what he does and what the New York Times does and what the Washington Post does, yes, those things are different because he actually publishes the kind of real details behind the scenes. But for all intents and purposes, in a technical sense, those things are the same. They're publishers. If you go after Assange, you can go after them. And so Obama thought, yeah, I'm not going to do it. Trump had no such predilection. Now, my thought was that he was going after Assange because he was embarrassed by the whole Russiagate stuff. And this was another one of those ways to show that he was strong against Russia. So he's going to give the weapons to the Ukraine. He's going to attack Venezuela. He's going to attack Iran. He's going to get rid of the missile treaties. And he's also going to go after Assange. What do you think about that? Because I did think that letting him go might have been this kind of thumb in the eye of all of those people and him being forced or feeling like he was forced to do this the first time around. What do you think, Maram?
I think that you hit the nail on the head because at the end of the day, the DNC leaks are why the Russiagate thing took off. They're saying that Trump got elected because Hillary Clinton's emails got hacked by Russia and then leaked by Assange, and therefore exposing her as corrupt resulted in Trump's victory. That's the narrative of Russiagate. But if Assange reveals his source and that his source isn't in fact Russia, it's Seth Rich or some other person, which hasn't been named, then it would destroy the Russiagate propaganda. So Trump could have been convinced that putting Assange in jail would pressure Assange into revealing the source of the DNC leak. And if you reveal the source of the DNC leak, then just reveal your source and we'll let you go. The thing is, though, that if Assange were to do that, it would undermine the credibility of WikiLeaks and would make any other potential source to feel nervous to come forward. So it's been his policy, no matter what, to not say who this source is, even though he heavily hinted that it was Seth Rich and that Seth Rich was assassinated because of it. He did so on television. So if you read between the lines, it's very clear that that's what he meant. Yes, but Trump would have wanted that to destroy Russiagate for the next 4 years. But if Trump plans on running for 2024, he might still want to pressure Assange into admitting who his source was for the DNC leaks. And perhaps that's why he'd want to keep him in prison, to keep that card in the deck, so to speak.
And they've already, this is in some sense already known that they had been talking to Assange about a pardon in exchange for the source of those leaks. But another part of the dynamic here is that WikiLeaks without Assange seems to have dramatically slowed down over the last couple of years. I haven't seen them publishing pretty much anything. They're still commentating. They're still, members of WikiLeaks still trying to get Assange freed, but they're not actively acting as WikiLeaks anymore. So there's this question of if Trump or somebody else doesn't let Assange out, if he's continuously charged and held in captivity, then what's going to become of that organization, regardless of whether he chooses to leak the leaker or not? Maram,
you're absolutely right.
What do you think?
I think the fact is that whilst Julian is in prison, who would feel comfortable leaking to WikiLeaks when its leader is in prison and possibly could be pressured further, compromised, etc., etc. I think that people would find it too much of a risk right now to leak into WikiLeaks because its leader is being held hostage. So it has affected WikiLeaks, but I think Assange has hope that no matter what happens to him, that this is his life work. This is, his idea to be the intelligence agency of the people. And I think that he's willing to die for that idea, or at least be imprisoned for life for it. So even if nobody leaks to WikiLeaks anymore, I don't see him giving up on his idea.
Let me ask you this, and this gets into an interesting philosophical point, I suppose. Is his life worth the information? Now, I suppose that goes from person to person, but I'm asking you, is his life worth that information? Yes, Assange, I remember the video where he hinted, he invoked Selfridge, and it's like nobody even brought it up. He brought it up, and it was out the blue, and it was so out the blue, the reporter responded to him and says, oh, wait a minute, are you saying so-and-so? And he like dropped that information into the conversation. So I know the interview you're talking about, but on a different point, is this information worth his life? If Assange could give the information and say, look, I got this from a leak from, I don't know, Bob Topp, would that damage him and WikiLeaks and all of his life work to such a degree that his life is basically, he's worth this information, withholding this information is worth giving his life for? I mean, like, that just seems so extreme to me. Is that true?
It's when that woman asked him, what do you mean? Do you mean Selfridge was the source of the leak? Because, he did drop that suggestion, and he said, recently, a young man was killed outside of his home. So, but his answer to the woman when she asked him, are you saying that he's the source of the leaks? His answer was, WikiLeaks doesn't reveal its sources. And, the other thing is we have to remember that another source was compromised. The source of the Iraq War video of the helicopter killing civilians, including a Reuters journalist, they were also thrown in jail. And basically, Assange had to claim that he was leaving the embassy to trick the US into releasing Chelsea and Manning. So what I'm trying to say is it started with Chelsea Manning as well. It's not just Selfridge. I fear that the sources being compromised has compromised WikiLeaks' credibility and ability to act as the intelligence agency of the people. The thing is that it doesn't really matter if Assange reveals who the source of the DNC leaks is, because Selfridge is already dead. Like, it's not going to hurt him more if Assange reveals that, but it might still kill the credibility of WikiLeaks. And whether or not that's worth Assange's life is only up to him to answer. But if it was me, I definitely think I would say it's worth my life to do that. If I had created something as amazing as Assange did, there would be no way that I would do anything to destroy it.
We've got maybe a minute and a half left, but pivoting slightly to talk about another aspect of the same topic. What do you think about Giuliani, Sarah Palin? I mean, James O'Keefe over at Project Veritas releasing this audio back from 2011 with the conversation between Julian Assange and a State Department attorney, where Assange was effectively warning them of an imminent leak and telling them that they had an opportunity to cover it up. In an interesting way, another strange sort of potential stain on the credibility of WikiLeaks as an organization if he's going directly to the State Department and warning them that they can cover up some of their sources in order to prevent, certain information from being leaked. But almost an aside there, it's just the right, various members of the right wing in the United States coming out to protect Julian Assange. Couldn't have predicted this a handful of years ago. What do you think of this stuff, Moran, before we go into our break?
Well, I think these people maybe are big-time enemies of Hillary Clinton. At the beginning, Trump was saying he loves WikiLeaks, and then he later said he doesn't even know what WikiLeaks is. it's very, very interesting that there's a push now to protect him. Maybe it is a sign that Trump will release him, but he's so unpredictable. He's released the Blackwater mercenaries, for God's sake, while everybody's asking him to pardon Assange. He's pardoned some mass murderers. So
it's true. Yeah, he released. It's absolutely true. Yeah, he released those 4 mercenaries, and this is as he is, as far as I can tell, like one of the sole political figures trying to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Sudan. It's very strange. In any event, we need to go into a break. We are joined by Maram Sousley, geopolitical analyst and chemist. We'll be back with her in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us, political commentator, geopolitical analyst, and, of course, chemist, Maram Sousley. Again, welcome back, Maram.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We always enjoy having you on the show. We've been having this conversation about Julian Assange, and I think the last question I asked was this notion of the extent or worth. Is it worth his life to not give up the source? Also, Shane kind of made this point, well, both of you actually, about releasing killers as opposed to releasing Assange. I mean, he was releasing like mass murderers in this. And like Shane made the point of how weird this is, because Donald Trump is pretty much the only figure, maybe Rand Paul, but the only main figure trying to get troops out of Afghanistan, trying to get troops out of Syria. And yet he's also releasing killers and murderers out of our jails. It is very bizarre. Edward Snowden had even pushed for Julian Assange to be released. And it seems like, I don't necessarily know where Trump is going to go. He still has but a month in office, so anything can happen. But I don't know. I agree with Shane. Like, the further along it gets, the less likely it gets. And that's unfortunate. Do you really think that these guys, like Sarah Palin, all of these people came to it by themselves? Or do you think it's something going on behind the scenes, like a little pressure campaign or something? And why now? Why all of a sudden do all of these right-wingers care about Julian Assange? I thought all of this was strange in the way that it kind of materialized. What do you think?
I think it makes sense because I think they think that they can use him as a tool against Biden, potentially. If he's out and about, maybe he can undermine Biden by releasing some damaging truth. I think that what Stranahan said earlier, that the audio tape leaked shows that Assange was contacting the State Department, warning them that these leaks were happening and trying to mitigate the damage, was actually not because he didn't intend to leak documents. He still fully intended to leak them. In fact, they'd already been leaked. It's just that The Guardian was going to release the unredacted version of it, which would reveal undercover spies and sources and possibly put their lives at risk. And I think that Assange knew that that was a line that shouldn't be crossed. So it wasn't him that actually did that. It was these Guardian journalists, David Ley and Luke Harding, that did it. Like, technically, they're the ones that should be in Belmarsh prison right now. And Assange was warning the State Department as a way to mitigate damage for what he feared would be used against him, and WikiLeaks. But the thing is, the fact that The Guardian leaked the unredacted documents, what we have to understand is The Guardian and WikiLeaks had a very close relationship for some time, but then The Guardian turned against him. And so many Guardian journalists actually published articles against Assange. One in particular claimed that he was being paranoid and completely insane by hiding out in the Ecuadorian embassy, because the U.S. had no intention of prosecute him with espionage charges. And of course that turned out to be completely false. That's exactly what happened. But yeah, there's some kind of internal fallout between WikiLeaks and The Guardian. And I think The Guardian tried to destroy WikiLeaks by publishing the unredacted files. And that's what put lives at risk. And by releasing this audio tape showing that Assange was trying to say, like, I didn't do it, I wasn't the one. The Guardian's about to leak the unredacted version, which is going to name specific individuals. It shows that he wasn't responsible. And so it does kind of destroy the argument posed against him. And this comes at a time where there are some right-wing Australian politicians, right-wing Australian politicians, not left-wing ones, coming out and asking for Assange's release. And the United Nations recently made a statement asking for Assange's release. So yeah, I do think that there is a segment that sees that this is a very bad idea. And it is terrible optics for the United States, because clearly, like in front of the whole world, they're prosecuting a journalist for doing his job, for doing a very good job, in fact.
Yeah, and that's ultimately why this is so bizarre to see this happening in the West, which of course, in the United States specifically, we tout our freedom of speech, and yet there's been this years-long saga against Assange, against a journalist. Anyway, I want to come back. Actually, you're talking about Luke Harding and David Ley, who published specifically they published a decryption key to State Department cables in this book that they released back in 2011. Another interesting note about Luke Harding. This is the same guy who in 2018, also in The Guardian, claimed that Julian Assange and Paul Manafort had met a few times at the Ecuadorian embassy. So that was the source of that narrative. Just interesting to note. It seems like they, like you were saying, they were working together in a period around 2009, 2010, and then there was this serious falling out driven by Luke Harding and David Ley. So just interesting looking back at the history of it. I'm actually going to make a hard pivot here to a completely different topic. I saw you talking about on Twitter. You were talking about neoliberalism as social policy, not just an economic policy, but a social policy. Specifically, you have this tweet up with an LGBTQ flag. This is from earlier this year, from a while back, but you were talking about it. You were making a sort of a larger case here. What was the case you were making? LGBTQ flag in Moscow, like a rainbow flag flying in Moscow, outside, I believe it was the U.S. Embassy, sort of project. One can view this in its own way as cultural imperialism. Other folks will look at this as simply a defense of human rights, according to the United States standards. What's your take? How do you see this, Maram?
I think that, the cause of not discriminating against people for their personal preferences is something that every country it's an internal political process. It started off as a grassroots struggle to, stop basically violence and discrimination against people who choose particular life choices. And somehow it's become corporatized and taken up by the United States government as a policy that is not only, law basically in the United States, but they're trying to impose that on other nations. And perhaps other nations culturally are just not ready for that liberalism, that level of basically the ideas of even 20 years ago, what was considered liberal then might be considered conservative now. You had basically transgender surgeries on young people wasn't mainstream back then. It would have been considered an outlier 20 years ago in the West, and now it's the opposite. It's accelerated a lot. I guess essentially what I see is cultural imperialism imposed by the West in the form of this neoliberalism, you can call it, or maybe an extreme liberalism. And they're using it to undermine nations which aren't really ready for it. And when I say undermine them, they're using them as a tool of subterfuge. We saw this in Russia. I mean, why else would the US have the pride flag in its embassy in Russia, other than to sort of instigate a certain element of Russian society who might be pro-LGBTQ to try to overthrow their government? I mean, to me, that's what it's really about. It's not really about gay rights. And of course, when it came to the invasion of Syria, or the war against Syria, if you recall, at the start of the war, there was all of these neoliberal reasons why we should go to war with Syria. And one of them was homosexuals are oppressed. And there was this fake story about a gay girl in Damascus that she wrote a blog about how she's oppressed and how she's running away from the Assad regime. And then she ended up being captured. And that whole blog turned out to be a middle-aged American man called Tom McMaster, who has some kind of degree from Edinburgh in international relations. So it was an operation, it was a propaganda operation. The fact is that in a place like Syria, there are homosexuals, and they aren't they aren't maybe on paper it's criminalized, but the police never acts against them. They never actually get thrown in jail for anything. But at the same time, it isn't the same as the United States in that it's also legalized and accepted, and there's gay marriage. Everybody goes at their own pace. And by trying to impose these kind of policies on Middle Eastern nations, specifically Lebanon is the biggest push at the moment. I think they're just trying to undermine other influences, specifically religious ones in the region. For example, the Orthodox Christian Church in Russia is one of the things that they're trying to undermine by doing this in Russia.
I got to be honest, shout out to homosexuals toppling Moscow. I think that image is hilarious to me. But I feel you. I don't think it's that serious. I get it. It is, poking the bear, to no pun intended. But I don't think it's that extreme where there's this belief that homosexuals are going to somehow topple the government of Russia because a flag is up on an American embassy.
It's just a little antagonism. Do you remember the Pussy Riots, for example?
I remember that. I remember that.
It's just part of that antagonism.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you on the antagonism part. One last thing before we leave. We have about a minute left. Israel and the collapse of that government again. The Gantz. And we have about 30 seconds. Do you have anything to say about that before we head out?
I think Netanyahu tried to save himself by dumping Trump, and maybe he wasn't that successful.
Oh, that's funny. The person you guys have been listening to is Maram Sousley, political commentator, geopolitical analyst, and of course, chemist. You can follow Maram on Facebook and Twitter at Partisan Girl. You can also find her on YouTube by searching for Syrian Girl Partisan, and support her Patreon at patreon.com/Syrian Girl. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning and the second to last edition of the show this week, by the way. You guys are listening to the most disruptive show covering news and events across our divided states and across the surface of our divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, folks, quick heads up here. We're not going to be on the air this Friday. I'm going to remind you again at the end of the show, and I will surely remind you tomorrow at least a couple of times. Again, you know, it's Christmas Day this Friday. We're off. Same thing next Friday, by the way. That will be New Year's Day. So these two next Fridays in a row, we are thankful to the whole federal holiday system. Those slightly longer weekends. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the headlines this morning. First up in COVID news, as of last night at 7 p.m., the U.S. has had a total of 17,974,303 COVID cases, and the number of total deaths rose to 318,569 yesterday, with 1,725 new deaths added to that count. On Tuesday night, that's last night, President Trump won agreement with three of his biggest enemies, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, U.S. Representative AOC Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, when he posted a video on Twitter slamming the $900 billion stimulus bill as a disgrace, calling on lawmakers to amend that package. We're going to play this thing another time. We've got this decently long clip, a 4-minute long clip. Don't worry, we haven't cut to the news. This is still us, of Trump last night, talking about this $900 billion stimulus bill, and again, slamming it in some detail. Andre, let's go straight into this clip.
Throughout the summer, Democrats cruelly blocked COVID relief legislation in an effort to advance their extreme left-wing agenda and influence the election. Then, a few months ago, Congress started negotiations on a new package to get urgently needed help to the American people. It's taken forever. However, the bill they are now planning to send back to my desk is much different than anticipated. It really is a disgrace. For example, among the more than 5,000 pages in this bill, which nobody in Congress has read because of its length and complexity, it's called the COVID relief bill, but it has almost nothing to do with COVID. This bill contains $85.5 million for assistance to Cambodia, $134 million to Burma, $1.3 billion for Egypt and the Egyptian military, which will go out and buy almost exclusively Russian military equipment, $25 million for democracy and gender programs in Pakistan, $505 million to Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. $40 million for the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., which is not even open for business. $1 billion for the Smithsonian, and an additional $154 million for the National Gallery of Art. Likewise, these facilities are essentially not open. $7 million for reef fish management, $25 million to combat Asian carp, $2.5 million to count the number of amberjack fish in the Gulf of Mexico, a provision to promote the breeding of fish in federal hatcheries, $3 million in poultry production technology, $2 million to research the impact of down trees, $566 million for construction projects at the FBI. The bill also allows stimulus checks for the family members of illegal aliens, allowing them to get up to $1,800 each. This is far more than the Americans are given. Despite all of this wasteful spending and much more, The $900 billion package provides hardworking taxpayers with only $600 each in relief payments. And not enough money is given to small businesses, and in particular restaurants, whose owners have suffered so grievously. They were only given a deduction for others to use in business their restaurant for 2 years. This 2-year period must be withdrawn, which will allow the owners to obtain financing and get their restaurants back in condition. Congress can terminate it at a much later date, but 2 years is not acceptable. It's not enough. Congress found plenty of money for foreign countries, lobbyists, and special interests, while sending the bare minimum to the American people who need it. It wasn't their fault. It was China's fault, not their fault. I am asking Congress to amend this bill and increase the ridiculously low $600 to $2,000 or $4,000 for a couple. I'm also asking Congress to immediately get rid of the wasteful and unnecessary items from this legislation and to send me a suitable bill, or else the next administration will have to deliver a COVID relief package, and maybe that administration will be me, and we will get it done. Thank you very much.
And that's it. I like the sort of, there are a couple of addendums there at the end. This is a little bit oblique, a little bit out of nowhere, but the thing about, and the next administration may have to deliver it, and maybe that will be me. Thank you very much. It's just this traditional, it feels off the cuff. I'm not sure if it genuinely is, but it's funny to listen to. Anyway, Jamarl, we've got more headlines here, but I'll come back to this. What do you think?
That is funny to listen to, and it's so right. He's so right. He's 1,000% right. Like, and it makes it like that much more clear when you enumerate what's in the bill, because you're basically saying, okay, we're going to give Americans $600. Now, instead of giving Americans more, because this is $600 after like 8 months. Instead of giving $600 to Americans, we're going to give $2 billion for Space Force, $1.2 billion for the wall. And then you start naming all of these countries. You start naming all of the tax cuts and the special entries. You start naming, well, at that point, an American can look at that and think to themselves, wow, they spent all of that money on all of these other things as opposed to dealing with the affairs of the nation. Yeah, Trump is absolutely right on that point. So right on. Also, there was one more thing, and I'll end it. People speculated that a better deal would be made with Trump than with Biden. That ended up being right. That ended up being totally right. So, yeah, that's what I think about it. I mean, we did the monologue and everything else. We were talking about it on the show, but yeah, Trump is right here.
And I want to come back to this. Do you think? I mean, I was making the point about Republicans holding Hillary back if she got into the presidency, but looking at how going into a Biden administration, how Congress is treating us with this bill. How do you think Hillary would have done? Do you think she would have done the $1,200 stimulus checks in the first place? Do you think she would have done more? Do you think she would have done less? Just looking at her as a single political figure, not necessarily the dialectic of the Republicans responding. What do you think she would have done, Jamarl?
I don't think the money would have came up as a UBI at all. That's what I mean. Look, people could say that's cynical, but who brought up the UBI? Trump brought up the UBI. He was the one that brought up the UBI. And if you remember, Pelosi and Schumer was against it originally. Trump wanted to give $1,200 to the American public originally. Democrats and Republicans, the Democratic leadership was against it. Trump was the one who brought up the UBI stuff. And so if Clinton is in office, does Clinton come up with the idea of a UBI? I don't know, but I haven't seen anything that would give me the impression that she would. So I honestly don't know. But like I said, it was Trump that was for it. It was the Democratic leadership that wasn't. So I don't know how this would have worked out in regards to Hillary Clinton being in office. That's the honest answer. Yeah, I really don't. It's kind of an unknown.
Completely out of nowhere. I think I do really, dramatically prefer Trump having been president to Clinton, but completely out of nowhere. At least if Clinton had been president, there wouldn't have been this years-long, drawn-out, stupid call and response back and forth between, on the one hand, the resistance, and on the other, like the Proud Boys and on the street right-wing protests and left-wing protests this summer. It's just, I don't know, man. It's just been tiring. exhausting politically. Anyway, into the headlines again. Pardons. Donald Trump announced a wave of pardons on yesterday, to over a dozen individuals ahead of his anticipated exit from the White House. The list includes former campaign aide George Papadopoulos, convicted during the Russiagate investigation for making false statements to the FBI. Alex van der Zwaan, also convicted during the Russiagate investigation for making false statements to Robert Mueller. Former Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter, convicted of misusing more than $200,000 in campaign funds. Chris Collins, guilty of conspiracy to commit securities fraud. 4 Blackwater Guards, mercenaries, that's how you can read the word guard there, involved in a deadly shooting of Iraqi civilians, because they deserve a pardon. 2 Border Patrol agents involved in a shooting of an unarmed man, Alfonso Costa, a dentist guilty of healthcare fraud. Alfred Lee Crum, convicted of illegal distilling of moonshine back in 1952. If there is a single outlier in this list, which one of these does not resemble the other? It's probably that one, Alfred Lee Crum. But all props to him distilling moonshine, I suppose. Weldon Angelos, 55 years for selling marijuana and carrying a handgun. And Trump commuted the remaining prison term of former Representative Steve Stockman, convicted of 24 felonies, including fraud and money laundering. The city of Detroit, meanwhile, and just, a quick follow-up here, as we were talking about with Maram Sousli earlier, didn't pardon Assange. We'll say there's been a rumor going around recently that Trump would pardon Assange, with some figures on the right, including Sarah Palin, whose organization, Assange's organization, WikiLeaks, actually dumped her emails over a decade ago at this point, I believe it was. Yes, over a decade ago. She has come out calling for a pardon of Assange, saying that she was wrong, apologizing for condemning him at the time. And so just an interesting about face there. Anyway, that pardon is not on this list. I'm skeptical that we're going to see it before Trump exits stage left from the White House. Detroit, the city of Detroit, has filed a lawsuit against Black Lives Matter activists alleging a quote-unquote civil conspiracy and claiming the protests in the city have, quote, repeatedly turned violent, endangering the lives of police and the public, end quote. The city claims the activists participated in the conspiracy, defamed the mayor and police, and contends that the city should be awarded damages. This is according to The Intercept. The city cites 4 protests that occurred in the city this year and alleges that injuries to police officers included, quote, cracked vertebra, lacerations, and concussions, end quote. That's according to the report. In slightly more international news, the UN Security Council members have decided to end the joint UN-African Union peacekeeping force in Sudan's western Darfur region when the mission's mandate runs out on December 31st after pressure from the country's transitional government, Russia, and African nations. The council voted unanimously late Tuesday not to extend the mandate of the joint mission known as UNAMID. In June, the Security Council unanimously approved replacing it with a much smaller and solely political mission, which will be known as the United Nations Integrated Transition Assistance Mission in Sudan, or UNITAMS. In India, an alliance of political parties in Indian-administered Kashmir opposed to India's policies in the region has won a majority of seats in local elections, the first since New Delhi revoked the disputed region's semi-autonomous status last year. The People's Alliance for Gupkar Declaration, PAGD, which is pro-India but favors self-governance in Kashmir, won 112 of a total of 280 seats in District Development Council elections, which were held in a staggered 8-phase process from November 28th through December 19th. So those just wrapped up a couple of days ago. Israel's government, in more international political news, this is significant. Israel's government collapsed yesterday, pushing the country into yet another early election. As the 4th election in just 2 years, the Israeli parliament dissolved itself at midnight on Tuesday. The move forced a new election after weeks of infighting and paralysis in the so-called unity government, a coalition sworn in just 7 months ago that paired Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's conservative Likud party with his main rival-turned partner, Benny Gantz, of the centrist Blue and White Party. A new election must take place in 3 months and is scheduled for March 23rd. In tech news, Elon Musk has taken to Twitter to reveal that during the darkest days of the Model 3 program, his words there, he offered Apple CEO Tim Cook a purchase of Tesla, the whole company, not just a car, for 1/10 of its current value. This would have been a number of years ago. Cook refused to meet him, and this comes on the tails of Apple's announcements, coming, I believe, out of Reuters, that they're keeping Project Titan, their self-driving car program, going, aiming reportedly at a release to the public by or in 2024. So this would be a passenger carrying commercial vehicle with self-driving capabilities coming from Apple. One quick thing here. You know what? Let's just go straight into the next one, the last headline here. 3 skiers lost their lives to avalanches over the weekend during an especially dangerous period in Colorado's popular backcountry. On Sunday, the bodies of 2 backcountry skiers were recovered from an avalanche. There was a third body also recovered after he was caught, buried, and killed in an avalanche in the Gunnison Zone. And with that, you're listening to, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are going into a break. We'll be back in just a minute. On the other side of this break with our guest, Kim Iversen. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and myself, Shane Stranahan. We will be back with Kim Iversen in just a minute.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Iversen. We are joined by Kim Iversen, independent journalist and host of The Kim Iversen Show on YouTube, which, by the way, you can and should check out on YouTube at youtube.com/Kim Iversen, spelled, by the way, KIMIVERSEN. You can also, you used to, we should get rid of this from our bio of you. Used to be able to follow Kim on Twitter at Kim Iversen Show, but she has long since departed that platform. I'm pretty sure you're still off there, Kim, right? It's just too much of a burden, too much vitriol, right?
Yeah, I'm still not on Twitter. I still can't stand the place. I check out Twitter. I do have like a dummy account, I guess, that I go and see what the news is and see what people are talking about. But no, Twitter is it triggers me too much.
I believe it. I've been trying to figure out how to use it. I like having a very small list of people that I follow and like keeping them kind of lighthearted and pleasant. And then I'll do my news research on there sometimes, just looking up independent accounts and stuff. But that way, at least it's not like a hellhole, a political hellhole, which it has sadly become. Anyway, that's not what we brought you on to talk about. Thank you so much for being with us, by the way. Let's talk about Sweden.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. So we've gone back and forth on this with you. The most recent reporting coming out of the establishment media is that Sweden is facing a sharp uptick in cases, and they've reimposed lockdowns. Now, we've had you on as one of our sort of resident skeptics of traditional narratives going around in the media on what's going on in Sweden, not to mention some of the wider aspects of what's going on with the coronavirus. What do you see happening? How do you see the media misreporting this? What do you think is actually going on the ground in Sweden, Kim?
Well, the Swedes that I speak to say, because once I started talking about Sweden, I got a lot of people from Sweden and even Finland and Norway messaging me. I actually have a lot of Finnish viewers of my show, and they tell me a lot about what's going on over there. And from inside the country and inside just the Nordic region in general, they are very appalled by the Western media's reporting on Sweden, and they're saying that the attitude in not only Sweden, but in the other countries surrounding Sweden is not that, oh no, they're this terrible disaster and, look at what's happened to them. They're all saying that many of the countries surrounding Sweden felt like, well, we wish we did what Sweden did. Now, Finland and Norway have essentially gone the Swedish way. They have not implemented lockdowns. The Finnish prime minister said, if we do that again, we're going to have a wave of populism and a wave of fascism that will cross through Europe because people will economically be collapsing and they're going to blame the government. And it's going to create a much larger crisis, a political crisis in the future. So,
I love that that's what they're focusing on. I don't want to cut you up, but I love that instead of focusing on the sort of first order consequence, which is economic collapse, they're focusing on how they will be affected by it as a political class. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and they have, right, exactly. They're like, oh no, the populists are coming for us. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know how bad of an idea that is. It depends, I guess, on the type of populists that are rising. Are they dangerous populists, or are they just angry people that want to collapse the establishment that's been, robbing them of all their money? That's not such a bad thing. But nonetheless, look, the way Sweden has always done it is they've always just given recommendations, and they've imposed in public spaces only more and more restrictions on how many people can gather together in groups. So it was at one point 200, and then it kind of went down to 50, and then they said, maybe we should make this 10 or 8, and now they've made it 4. But I've read in Western media things like, oh, you'll go to jail now if you break these lockdown rules. That is not the case in Sweden. It's still recommendations. You're not going to be, even in a public space, if you gather, the authorities are not coming after you. So it's just strong recommendations that most of the people do choose to follow. Now, they still don't wear masks. They did say, they now are saying wear masks on public transit during rush hour is what they're saying. And yeah, the case numbers are high, but their hospital levels are still below where they were in the spring. So that's another thing I don't understand that's coming out of Western media that's like a flat out lie. You can actually go to the Swedish Health Ministry's website, which is what I do. You'd have to translate it from Swedish into English, but you can actually see the number of beds being used for COVID, for ICU beds and regular beds. And that number is much lower than where it was at in the spring. So this narrative that, oh no, they're way worse off, things are worse, it's not true. The numbers don't lie.
Maybe we need to change the beginning of this. Maybe I am not the last person on the wall. I think Kim Iverson is the last person on the wall. You're fighting for the Sweden narrative. I got to be honest, Kim, I don't know what you're pointing to, where you're getting this. I understand that there may be random people who call you from Sweden. I have no idea who those random people are. Only thing I can go by is what the King says, and I can go by the reporting from the standpoint of the numbers. The King said that what Sweden did was an outright failure. The King came out and gave a statement about it. So I'm going to err on the side of the King. On top of that, you have this statement right here. Sweden's death rate, over 80 per 100,000 people, is among Europe's highest and is around 10 times as great as those of Norway and Finland, and over 4 times Denmark's. COVID-19 hospitalizations are now rising faster than it is in most European countries, and Sweden is caring for more patients in hospitals now than it did at the height of the first wave. By December 21st, Sweden has surpassed the United States and all major European countries in its daily confirmed cases per million. Things have gotten so out of control that Norway is putting military to prevent Swedes from crossing over into the country. Now, what of that have I said that's a lie? And if nothing that I've said there is a lie, which is not, then Sweden has failed. I don't understand why you're fighting so hard for Sweden on this.
Because for one, what is the alternative? Lockdowns? That is a disaster and not working. But 2, actually everything you said is a lie. This is what I'm not understanding, how Western media is getting away with this. That is all a lie. Every last bit of it. The King came out, and the question that was asked of the King was about the nursing homes. And the King said, we have failed. And then Western media, which Sweden has always said about their nursing homes, Sweden has always said, wow, that, our policy with nursing homes needs to shift, which is, by the way, the whole world needs to shift their policies on nursing homes. New York was putting COVID patients in the nursing homes to infect all the other nursing home patients. So nursing homes was a failure. Sweden has always said that was a disaster. Next time we need to do something better, and we need to correct systemic issues that have existed before COVID in our nursing home situation. The King then issued another statement after Western media went nuts and started saying, oh, look, the Swedish King came out and said it was a failure. The Swedish King, the royal court came out and issued another statement saying, no, that is not what the King said. He was expressing sympathy for the lives lost, not saying the strategy was a failure. He was not discussing this. He was not saying anything about the strategy. That was misreported. That was an absolute lie by the Western media. Secondly, the numbers do not lie. You can go to the Swedish website and you can see the number of hospitalizations every single day You can see the number of ICU beds every single day, and it is not higher. It's about half of where it was in the spring. So if they were not overwhelmed in the spring, how are they suddenly overwhelmed now with half of the hospital beds? That is a lie. Third, there was another lie coming out that the Nordic neighbors had offered assistance to Sweden, that everything was so out of control that they were offering assistance. Then when you actually read what happened, a journalist went and asked somebody in Norway about, a public health official in Norway about whether or not they would help Sweden. And the Norwegian public official said, well, yeah, because we've had a reciprocal public health agreement for forever. And so if they need help, we would, of course, always be willing to help. And then they even stated in that article, but Sweden hasn't asked for help, by the way. So, yeah, the media is trying to paint the disaster. And you have to remember the reason they're trying to paint the disaster is because they promoted lockdown, and they don't want to show you that a non-lockdown, non-mask society, so not only are they not under lockdown, they didn't do masks, that it did not result in bodies piling up in the street. It did not result in absolute mayhem, chaos. And no, they are not the worst off in Europe. In fact, their deaths per million have them currently ranked at 24th in the world, whereas in the spring, by the way, it was at about 15th. So they were right where the United States and Italy, and now guess where Italy is? Italy is ranked 5th in the world. You've got, how can they say that they're the worst off in Europe? Belgium is 2nd in the world, deaths per million. Italy's 5th in the world. You've got Spain, 9th in the world. The UK, 11th in the world. You have France, 15th in the world. All of these, Sweden is 24th in the world. Are they worse off than Denmark, Norway, and Finland? Yes, they are. That is absolutely true. But if you're going to say, well, you can't compare Sweden to Italy, France, and the UK, you have to compare them to Norway and Denmark, well, then you can't compare us to New Zealand or Thailand. You'd have to compare us to Mexico or Canada. I mean, we have to be more, I think we have to be more consistent in our arguing. The other question is, what are you arguing? So if you say Sweden was a disaster and it was a failure, what was lockdowns? Because Italy went into lockdown and now they're 5th in the world. Belgium went into lockdown and they're 2nd in the world. France went into lockdown. The UK went into lockdown. The US went into lockdown, and they're way worse than Sweden. So what is the alternative?
The alternative is basically locking down, yes, especially if there's flare-ups, and ensuring that the government maintains, let's say, the integrity of the economy and everything else. I don't buy that everybody is lying. I don't buy that. I mean, you're basically making a choice between two sources and picking a source that feeds your interests. And fair enough. You can say, I'm doing the same. But I am doing this just based on the reporting from it. And based on, what the king said, but here's the prime minister of the country that also basically backed the king up. Prime Minister Stefan Löfven said he agreed with the king's remarks. Of course, the fact that so many people have died can't be considered anything other than a failure. Now, that doesn't sound like he's only talking about nursing homes. That sounds like he's talking about Sweden in comparison to the nations that are surrounding Sweden. And by the way, you don't have to compare the United States to anybody else because the United States is primary in regards to the number of people that have died. I mean, I guess I'm making the point, if you want to look at China, for example, 1.3 billion people. The U.S. is 300,000. If you want to look at India, for example, well, you can compare us to those countries from the standpoint of size, meaning they're much larger than us, and they still have less than us. We don't need to be compared to anybody else, is my point. The number of deaths per day, the number of deaths overall, put us in a category all to ourselves. I'm talking about this idea that doing nothing or barely doing anything or giving this kind of voluntary stuff was successful. And I'm saying it was not.
Okay, if it wasn't, let me ask you this. Why are Finland now and Norway, the neighbors of Sweden, refusing to do lockdowns, and now they're going the way of Sweden?
Look, I don't doubt that countries, all things being equal, don't want to shut down. I don't want the country to lock down. This is not something that I'm like, yes, let's do this. I'm not enamored by that prospect at all. I'm sick of being stuck at the house. I'm sick of not being able to go to places that I want to go. I'm sick of retail going belly up and those people losing their businesses. So this is not the highest aspiration that I have. I don't want to even cast it in that way. But I do recognize that if something is interceding into our world, a real physical, material thing that's adversely affecting our community, that it is not wrong. It is, in fact, ethical and right to try to take steps to mitigate it, even if you can't necessarily nail everything right. And in this case, I don't see Sweden as a success. And with the number of people that have been dying in the United States, I don't think the strategy to that is basically saying, hey, let's just give voluntary orders and let people go as they go. We did that. And we had a large number of people that died. And those people haven't recovered, meaning we haven't even finished the first wave yet. So I guess I'm not buying the entirety of this argument of just laissez-faire, just let people do their thing and they won't die as much. I don't buy that.
Have you looked at the graphs? Have you actually gone to worldometers or worldometers and looked at the graphs of Denmark? Look at the graphs of Norway. Look at the graphs of Germany.
Wait. I don't want to interrupt you. I want to give you a full point because it sounds like we're arguing. So let's do this. Let's take a break and we'll come back and Shane can bring you back, but you can definitely finish your point. Kim Iverson is an independent journalist and host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. You can watch Kim on YouTube at youtube.com/Kim Iverson and follow her Twitter account on @KimIversonShow. We will be right back. You guys are listening to a spirited Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What do we want? News, politics, and culture. When do we want it? Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And you could be listening to some callers soon. I'm opening the phone lines up. 202-521-1320 is the phone number to call if you want to join us for this topic. We're joined by Kim Iverson, independent journalist and host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. This is fantastic, by the way. I'm just sort of leading back because you guys are, going at it. And I'm just an innocent, hapless spectator who's really enjoying the conversation. Kim, I'm going to hand it back over to you. And again, 202-521-1320 if you want to join the conversation. Kim, I'll put it like this. I like the fact that you do your own research. And I'm also very interested. Anybody, I want to hand it back over to you with this question. You can feel free to follow up however you want to, though. Anybody other than yourself that you would recommend for reporting on this? Obviously, the mainstream media has their take, and it is universally anti-Sweden in terms of their approach to this. As far as I can tell, pretty much across the board, every outlet I've seen has been a chorus on this one. And the jury, in my opinion, is still out on this. Largely, just to be honest, due to what you've said, due to your, to the source reporting. Anybody else out there that you would recommend to follow on Sweden, on what's going on there, Kim?
I would just say try to always look for Swedish-based sources. So go to Swedish news directly, like what Swedes are getting in the country. And not only in Sweden, but go to Finland and Norwegian news outlets as well. That's where I try to read all of my sources from, is from inside that Nordic region, because Western media is how they are, like in lockstep completely against Sweden and lying about the numbers. And I'm not sure how I really am. It's one of the most infuriating things to me that they are blatantly lying. It's no longer just misreporting. It's actually lying. Or it is also misleading. Like the King's statement was absolutely misleading. They did not give context, nor did they give the follow-up statement of the King after that. And also not understanding Swedish language. There are obviously translations and whatnot, but no one in Sweden, the Swedish people, are not calling for lockdowns. They're not saying, wow, we should have done this differently. That's not coming out of there. And it's not coming out of the Nordic nations. That is why Norway and Finland have now gone, for one, Norway only did a 2-week lockdown. And then they were like, and it wasn't even a full lockdown. They never closed restaurants. And so after that, Norway said, nah. And by the way, now cases when you actually look at the real graphs for Norway, for Denmark, for Germany, not Denmark, I take that back a little bit, but Norway and Germany for sure, their death graphs, when you look at those, they are way higher in deaths now during the winter wave than they were during their spring wave. Whereas in Sweden, it is the opposite. Their spring wave death toll was much greater. They had 6,000 deaths in the spring, and right now they're registering just a little over 2,000 in their winter. So you cannot lie about those numbers. Those numbers do not lie. 6,000 is much greater than 2 or even 2,500, which they'll probably hit 2,500, maybe 3,000. Nonetheless, it's still half. So the other thing is look, Sweden has become like a very contentious political discussion, and it seems to be that there's this, Sweden is okay. If you're for Sweden, you're now on this one path, and if you're not for Sweden, you're for lockdowns. Lockdowns clearly don't work. I don't know how anyone at this point can still advocate for lockdowns. We've seen lockdown nations numbers increase. I'm in California where we've been in lockdown and we've been under mask mandates, and we're in dire straits. Our hospitals are totally overwhelmed. I don't know how that happened, given the fact that we never opened our restaurants back up here in Los Angeles, except for outdoor dining briefly. But India, why aren't we talking about India? India had to go the herd immunity strategy as well. They didn't have a choice. And India has the second most populated country in the world. They did lockdowns for 10 weeks. During those 10 weeks, they saw mass starvation, heat stroke, serious issues. Plus, it didn't help them. They saw their numbers quadruple. And they thought, crap, we cannot continue lockdowns. They opened their country back up June 1st. They did lockdowns from March 24th to June 1st. They opened their country back up June 1st. The virus ran wild through their country. It hit its peak in the middle of September and started to naturally go down. And now their scientists are saying, we believe we've hit herd immunity in many of our most populated areas. Like in Delhi, they're saying they've reached herd immunity where 60% of their population has caught the virus. They also in India, yes, the government said wear masks, socially distanced, but people did not. And we see the video and photo evidence of that they were not socially distancing, nor were they wearing masks. They had celebrations, festivals, religious events, and major, big, huge farm protests going on all throughout India. And yet, where's the mass carnage? This is my point. Sweden, yes, do they have a higher death rate than Denmark? Yes, but there's also a totally different, Denmark doesn't have the mass nursing homes that Sweden has. Denmark also doesn't have the poor immigrants. By the way, remember, Sweden took in loads and loads of immigrants, and those immigrants are still poor, living in crowded, confined areas, and that's the majority of those who've passed in Sweden, is that immigrant population. Denmark is still very homogeneous. Sweden is not. Sweden has like 28% of its population now is immigrant. And, India had this. So again, when we're looking at these countries that had no choice, or they made the choice to not go into lockdown, and the populations are not adhering to protocols like mask wearing, the big question many of us have is, where's the mass carnage in these areas? If you tell us that the only way forward is lockdown, I want you to answer that question of where's the mass carnage for those countries that didn't.
Are you serious? India suffered greatly. Brazil suffered greatly. And by the way, India was wearing masks. I don't know if you've seen the videos of the guards, the policemen that were forcing people to wear masks or hitting them with sticks and whatnot when they weren't wearing masks. Why? Because they got hit hard. India was one of the main countries that got hit. I can't believe you're using India as one of your reference points. And look, I can agree with you. I can agree with you on this point. That, with the lockdowns and everything else, it seems that something else is necessary. I agree with you on that point. Because I don't think that you can have lockdown for a year. I think that would be problematic at best. I think you're going to run into all sorts of problems. But also, there's this aspect that people don't just stay still. So it doesn't entirely matter if California locked down, if the other states weren't. Meaning, if you have the Sturgis Festival and you have all of these people, basically a petri dish, some of those people are going to go back to California. Some of those people are going to go back to Virginia. Meaning, in Maryland, yes, we have the lockdown thing, but that guy that went there could very well come back to this state and infect somebody else. Meaning, because not all of us took the same, let's say, methodology in regards to doing and attending to this adequately and severely and seriously, well, it's out of control. And the same thing in some of these other countries. I don't know the answer. So I'm not going to say that, I have God's honest reality in regards to the answers. I'm just saying it seems that something has to be done to mitigate it. And if it's not lockdowns, okay, fair enough. If it's, but you got to come up with something. I don't think the state can stand by and do nothing. From your standpoint, what should, let me, maybe that's a better question. Because we're going back and forth, and I don't think we're going to come to a resolution. What should be done from the standpoint of state? Meaning, with all of these people dying, you got like 3,000 people dying a day. Do you really tell the public that to do nothing?
No. So in India, let's go back to India, because I think they actually handled it the best when you actually look at what happened over there. So yeah, the first 10 weeks, India was very intense, and there were people being beaten for not complying with lockdowns and mask wearing, and 10 weeks of brutality going on in India. But after they eased, after June 1st, when they eased lockdowns and they realized that actually the lockdown was a worse cure than the disease itself, they were killing people from hunger and heat strokes and whatnot, they had no choice but to open up. And this is where the news stopped reporting India. What did India do? India started focusing, because they knew there was no vaccine this past summer. They could not do lockdowns. They just couldn't do it anymore. And no, I mean, look, all you have to do is just go research farmers' protests. You will see older men, the high-risk category, people, hundreds of thousands together, not wearing masks at all. And same with all of their festivals. Most people in India were not compliant. But what India did, because they knew they didn't have any other choice, was they focused on therapy. They said, we're not going to wait for some miracle cure. We're not going to lock down. We can't. We're going to have to focus on therapies. So they went and they started administering, those evil drugs that Trump was talking about. They did hydroxychloroquine at first through the summer. And then come August, they made a switch to ivermectin. They said to their population, and they focused on Ayurvedic medicines. They focused on vitamins, and the government gave these for free to their population. They gave them herbal remedies and vitamins, and they gave them the anti-parasitic drugs. And they did this because they said, what we're going to try to do is we can't really prevent you from getting sick, but we can prevent you from getting too sick. We can't prevent you from catching the virus, but we can prevent you from ending up hospitalized. And that was their number one focus throughout this pandemic now, has been treatment protocol. In fact, they have a huge festival that's about to happen here in about 2 weeks. It's a festival where all these people from this particular type of Hindu, where they go and they bathe and they camp together for a month, and they eat together and they bathe together and they sing and they dance and they do all these things, and they're older. Most of them are senior citizens. And so what India is going to do is, they know they've got thousands upon thousands of people going to be descending together, no social distancing, no masks, and they are giving all of them ivermectin in a round of three doses on day 1, 3, and 7, and they're all getting it, and they're all senior citizens, and they're saying, we're going to do this to keep you safe because this is going to keep the numbers down. India focused on treatment, and now that the vaccine's out, because India also said to its population, try to keep the older people safe, do what you're going to do, but keep the older people safe. Now that the vaccine's coming out, they're going to try to get 300 million doses to give to their older population and healthcare workers. But they are not talking about inoculating their entire population. They don't feel like they need to. They're talking about keeping older people protected with doing treatment.
Kim, this is very interesting. We're pushing up against a break, and we also have a caller. I'm going to push this just a couple more minutes, just because I want to make sure we get the caller in. Whale, calling in from the chat, specifically the Fault Lines Radio chat over on YouTube. Whale, you're in the room here. What's going on? What's on your mind?
I heard you ask Kim for recommendations on who to get to talk about the other side, or Kim's side. I would recommend Ivor Cummings, Ivor Cummings. Knut Witkowski, KNUTWITKOWSKI, and Anders Tegnell. He's pretty good too. Also,
Anders Tegnell, you're just talking about the chief epidemiologist in Sweden, right? I think that's who Anders Tegnell is.
Yeah. Also, there's there's a libertarian, Tom Woods. He's been doing a newsletter, a bunch of newsletters about lockdowns, just graphs and data about it. Also, Jeffrey A. Tucker will be a good one too, who's been writing about the history of social distancing and the lockdowns as well. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you for the recommendations. Well, we need to go into a break. Kim, are you okay? I don't want to push this. Are you okay to stick with us for just another couple minutes here? I think we have another call for you.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Thank you. All right. For everybody listening, you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Iverson. Kim Iverson, journalist and a YouTuber. We'll be back with Kim taking calls, 202-521-1320. Be back in just a minute on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. That's my co-host and myself, respectively. And Kim Iverson. Again, Kim Iverson is a journalist, also a creator of content, independent journalist, and host over on YouTube. Check out the Kim Iverson Show, youtube.com/Kim Iverson. Kim, thank you again for being with us. Thank you for sticking with us through to the other side of this break. We are taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. We have our inveterate caller, Brave, calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, what's going on? Hey, Kim, how you doing today? I want to get you guys' opinion on the level of propaganda that rolled out so quickly after Trump made his had his moment last night. Especially on CNN, MSNBC, and the like. I personally went live and just kind of started picking through the actual bill. And for anyone that wants to read the bill, they can go to rules.house.gov and actually look it up. It is very, very, very intense. In the first 6 pages, are primarily talking about defense spending and all kinds of other stuff. There's very little there talking about the coronavirus relief. So I guess I'll nail this down to 2 things. One, the reason why they would even put these 2 bills together, other than trying to float this NDAA out without getting pushback from the populace, without having done something for COVID, and then second, the massive amount of propaganda that's kind of hit right immediately after Trump made his speech. And
wait, Brave, explain what you mean by that. Because I didn't see the news immediately after Trump made the speech. In fact, I didn't see the speech until this morning. So what was the propaganda that was coming immediately after Trump gave this, basically said give people 2,000?
Right. So you could. So I had again. I went live on Facebook. I had CNN playing on one channel. I had MSNBC playing on another channel, and then I was scrolling through on online media as well. And they were literally rolling out the same propaganda points. They were talking about how Trump had not been a part of the the attempt to get some kind of stimulus all this time. Then, of course, they rolled the line out. These are the key lines that stood out. Then they rolled the line out saying, well, this is the best we could do. It's not much, but it's something. And these are things you're seeing repeated in social media from regular Americans, right? And then they have, what's her name? Sheila Jackson Lee come out on CNN, and she's bringing up the point that, which is very weird, she brings up the point that we all have documentation on how we were asking for $2,000 in the beginning. It's almost like they were caught with their pants down, and now they're trying to come up with their teacher's notes real quick to cover their backs because they know they weren't really doing anything. And if you just take some time today or whenever you have time, scroll through all of the media coverage, especially the main corporate media coverage, and you'll see so many similarities in the lines that they rolled out, the statements that were rolling out from the so-called specialists on the subject matter and different politicians. It's really Orwellian how it all goes out.
Yeah, I saw part. Okay, so I saw the MSNBC. So I saw Mark Warner come out, who basically said only the far left and the far right have issues with this bill, which is nonsense. There's more. You have 20 million people potentially up for eviction, and he's like only the far right, far left. Nonsense. You had Pelosi complaining, basically saying this bill is great, this bill is perfectly fine, this is a great deal for America. You even had some of the other Democrats on, I think I showed Klobuchar, basically saying that this deal was great and that Donald Trump trying to give people $2,000 is basically an attack on America. All of them are on the same page, and they're on the same page because Biden talked to both, meaning Republicans and Democrats, and gave Democrats confidence that $900 billion was adequate, meaning it gave them confidence to cut the amount of money that was going to go to the American public, the left and to the right. Kim, what do you think about this?
Jamal, I think it's interesting that you don't trust the establishment media when it comes to this, but you trust them about Sweden.
Oh, man.
I mean, look, they lie. Obviously, we know establishment media lies. And yeah, it is a huge problem. You've got, like CNN, the headlines that are coming out about this relief package and what Trump is saying. I mean, the caller's right. They're MSNBC. Here's Amy Klobuchar. Trump trying to burn this country down on his way out. And then here's another one, Representative Adam Schiff. Donald Trump was missing in action on COVID relief bill negotiations. And then, CNN, again, they're talking about, Trump, all of the headlines coming out of mainstream, especially left-leaning media, and really all, because look, right-wing media doesn't want to give American people any money, and left-wing media is all about Biden and Democrats, and they don't want to expose the fact that they don't do anything for the American people. Media lies. And the bottom line is that us, the people, suffer because we, for one, all looked at this bill and thought this is crap. And the fact that they bundled it together with, the spending bill, which should have been broken up into 25 different pieces of legislation, quite frankly, but they bundle everything together, so you have to say yes to everything. And then they all do it at Christmas week so that everybody's rushed through the process. And they gave, they gave 5,000 pages, over 5,000 pages to all of these legislators to read in 8 hours. I mean, I can't read a 300-page book in 8 hours, let alone a 5,000-page one. It's all a joke. I mean, the whole thing, Trump is absolutely right. And when Trump came out and said this, I could tell you that amongst my liberal friends even, they were all saying, wow, I mean, the guy actually is standing up for us and this is what we want. And yet the media goes crazy and says, oh, no, Americans don't want this. It's a flat out lie. We do want him to fight for us because we all know the bill is crap.
Shane, what do you think? I mean, you know how I feel about it. I think I was very clear early on how I felt about this bill. What do you think about the embarrassment, though? Because basically Trump has just come out of nowhere and basically put a spotlight around the deficiencies of the bill. And it wasn't like him just saying it. This wasn't like Trump just saying, oh, this bill is trash. And, no, he enumerated item by item by item to show America how little they care about you in lieu of these other items. I thought that was monstrously effective. So what do you think, Shane?
I think it's interesting. It's just interesting to hear Kim talking about. It's interesting to hear you talking about your liberal friends who were like surprised that he was saying this. I was having those same thoughts myself this morning. I was thinking about this. I'm wondering if the never Trump, hardline Democrat family members of mine specifically, it's more family than friends, we take that line. I wonder what they think about this, because I know some of these people are suffering, and I can't help but think I kind of want to reach out to him and ask him about it. But it's a little bit of a touchy subject. Anyway, here's what I think about it generally. We've been talking this morning about the horseshoe theory, about how it's interesting to see, I keep bringing this up, it's interesting to see Trump taking effectively the same position as the progressives in Congress, the faux-gressives, some people might call them, and pushing for more money and pushing for a stimulus check. And here's the thing, it's on the eve of a Biden administration, on the eve of a Democrat administration. I'm a little bit optimistic that at this point we're seeing the first signs of a potential broad coalition in the populist left and the populist right, where for years now, maybe decades, members of the fringes of American politics, which in whole might represent a majority of the American public, at least the politically engaged public, have been at each other's necks, even though they agree on a lot when it comes to particularly the military, foreign intervention, and corruption in Congress and government. And there's been a circular firing squad thing going on where everybody, who's on those fringes is attacking the same center, and in the process, vociferously attacking each other. And I'm hopeful that going into a Biden administration, there's the potential at the very least that this might be one of the first signs of a coalition between the progressive left and the populist right coming together in opposition to what is their common enemy. Kim, what's your take on that? Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think there's any chance that's going to happen? What do you think?
I think there is a chance, but I think it's going to take a little bit more time. I think it's going to take a little bit more time for those who hoped that, with Biden winning, that he was going to finally build out this progressive cabinet. When they said, well, okay, we didn't get Bernie, we didn't get, whoever they might have wanted, right? But Bernie will, but Biden is going to put these people into his cabinet. We're going to have this really progressive cabinet. We're now saying that's not true. When we see the squad unwilling to force the vote on Nancy Pelosi for Medicare for all, we're seeing all of these various things happening with the so-called progressives in Congress. And I think it is making average people that are progressive champions on the populist left, I think they're waking up and they're saying, wow, they really aren't going to fight for us. This really isn't, the Democratic Party is not going to be the party that's going to champion us or help us out. And so I do think that we are starting to witness this shifting in mentality where people are saying, I don't know, man, maybe we've got to have a different way, and maybe we've got to get together and fight the establishment. And we're seeing all of these various memes. I was really surprised. And I was seeing meme after meme after meme coming out last night. I don't know if you've seen these, where you've got the donkey and the elephant, obviously representing the Democrats and the Republicans. And then you've got this lion. They have this lion that they've got out trying to represent Trump. But what the Trump people are saying is neither of those parties are working for us, and we want something different. And I think we should champion that feeling. Obviously Trump's not going to be the guy, but give them somebody else to channel that energy toward, somebody that we can all agree on.
Yeah,
here's the hope.
Yeah, yeah. Here's the hope. Here's the hope. I agree, Shane.
Yeah, you know what? We've got to close this out. Kim, thank you for sticking with us for these last couple of minutes, taking that call, having this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. I know we get spirited always about this one, Jamarl, you and me, but
it's always a good conversation. I always enjoy it. When I saw it, I was like, all right, Kim is coming on. You're Sweden. So no, I love it when you come on. They're always good spirited conversations, good natured. So no, man, thank you for coming on.
Alrighty. Absolutely. Yeah. And also, I just like the straight to the source, straight to the facts reporting. Anyway, for those listening, Kim Iverson, independent journalist, host of The Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. We are closing this show out. By the way, we're not going to be on the air this Friday or next Friday. This Friday is Christmas Day. Next Friday, New Year's Day. We're going to be off. Better holidays, folks. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you to producers Cameron and Raheem. Thank you, Jamarl Thomas, my co-host. Thank you, engineer Andre. Thank you to all of our guests. And again, thank you, that is you, for listening to this show. We'll be back tomorrow, folks.
headlines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the books. This was a very spirited show today, to put it mildly. And I think it was a good one. I think it was an exceptional one. Let's see. We have chats. Let's see. We have Up and Gardner. Thank you, Up and Gardner. We also have Wesley Walker. Great show today. Glad I caught a live one. Right on, Wesley. I'm glad you caught the live one also. Yeah, man, it was a good spirited show today. I really enjoyed it. All of the guests, the call-in segments, the topics, everything was on point. Anna Maxa, it's hypocritical for someone to complain about the arrest of Jimmy, but the arrest of Assange and hold it up like that. Wait a minute, let me say that one more time. It's hypocritical for some to complain about the arrest of Jimmy Lai, but the arrest of Assange and hold him like that. I think you're trying to say that complaining about the arrest of Jimmy Lai, but not complaining about Assange is basically hypocritical. Fair enough. I mean, look, from my standpoint, Assange is a publisher. He received information about waste, fraud, and abuse. And the government itself typically has an impetus to not show you those things for obvious reasons that it is embarrassing and there could be legal consequences if you are exposing waste, fraud, and abuse by the U.S. government. Assange supposedly is not protected by our laws in regards to publishing and in regards to dispensing of information like by the press. However, supposedly, he is governed by our laws from the standpoint of going after him. So there's this weird quagmire, or this weird doublespeak of, yes, Assange is privy to our laws despite not being an American citizen, but no, he's not privy to the defenses of those laws that they would allow. We can hit him, but he can't defend himself when we hit him. That's obscene. I mean, the premise is obscene on its face, and that is basically what they're asking you to accept. Whether you invoke Jimmy Lai or anything else, I don't think these guys, they will come up with reasons. I've had conversations with Democrats. I used to be on another radio station. All of the people were Democrats. And they would say, I would point out, well, Obama used the Espionage Act more than anybody else. He was locking these people up left and right. How are you all of a sudden bothered by Donald Trump going after whistleblowers? He didn't seem to care about it under Obama. And what they would say is, well, Obama and the people who whistleblew under Obama didn't do it properly. They didn't go through the official channels. Because they didn't go through the official channels, that it was fair game for Obama to go after him. This is the shit they say. I'm telling you, this is the way they think. They don't have this idea in their heads of reality and objectivity and fairness. And that stuff is out the window. These guys are tribes. And the same thing is true for pretty much all political distinctions. They get into a tribal mentality. There's an arrogance about it. There's a smugness about it. But oftentimes, they think about these things in these warped ways. You will point out Hillary Clinton got information from a British spy who got information supposedly from the Russians to use against Trump. You point that out, and they would say, but Hillary Clinton paid for the information. Donald Trump didn't. So Donald Trump not paying for it makes it illegal. They say shit like this. I guess my point is, yes, you point out the hypocritical shit. You should point out the hypocritical shit and how stupid it is when they try to come up with an excuse and a dodge for why one is pertinent and the other is not. And oftentimes they would say that's whataboutism. Well, whataboutism is just a way to try to explain or not wanting to explain how something that you're trying to incriminate is being done by somebody else you're giving a pass to. That's all that is. It's just the dodge. It's the linguistic dodge. And it's almost an admittance that this person, who I just brought up, is just as guilty as the person you're trying to condemn. Whataboutism? Well, I appreciate you admitting that I'm right that the other person is guilty, but my concern is selective justice. How are you going to act as if selective justice is not justice? Selective justice is not justice. If you're going to be up on it for this one guy, and this other person who's in your tribe has basically done the exact same thing, then I am not going to give a shit about the fact that you are trying to go after the other guy, because I know it is selective. And I'm not playing that game where you use the government instrument itself to go after political opponents. I am not participating in that nonsense. Aspire for peace. UBI is a neoliberal scam. Look up Milton Friedman. Well, look, my argument had been that the UBI is a bribe. Now, I would argue that society in and of itself is built on bribery. The middle class, the upper class, poor. The society is based on this notion that the upper class is going to be able to get God's amount of money. But if they throw a pins down, if they pee out coins, then the middle class may be satiated and maintain the system as it is. Even though it's unfair, it would take more energy to overturn it for unpredictable outcomes, as opposed to accepting the society the way it is. They're privileged. They have the privilege to be able to accept what's pissed out and use that to operate and live. And you have many in the middle class who are able to craft a pretty decent life with the money that is pissed out from plutocrats. That's because they have so much money, and the pissing out of it is, just fractions. But what happens when you get further down in the income scale? What happens when you get to people who are making $18,000 a year, which is basically a poverty wage, and is that the head of the household? What happens when those people who are in retail lose their job, or the people who are barely making it get tossed out of their homes? What happens? How many people in a society in dire straits is necessary for that society to basically implode? Meaning, the people who basically were getting the bribe and were privileged, when those people are no longer privileged anymore, when that money is not going to those people anymore, when there's not enough, where they say, all right, I don't like this, but I'll accept this. When that changes to, it is harder to not do anything than to take the heft of trying to change our system. When it gets there, the system changes. It's like an inflection point. It can go for the better or for the worse. But I think society in and of itself basically boils down to a bribe. The catch is UBI makes that more emphatic. No, you're not going to own the means of production. No, you're not going to be able to own how the stuff is produced, how quantities that the stuff is produced, when the stuff needs to be produced, where the resources and the revenue from that, where it goes, how much power the government is going to have, how much power is private interest going to have. Those are questions that you don't have access to because you don't have political power and you don't have means of control of the production of the things that we produce. So UBI enters. So yeah, I want to have Uber or Lyft as an automated car. You hit on your cell phone, it comes to you, it drives you from point A to point B, solar power, so it never needs to go to a gas station, and the car basically drives around. Every so often it needs to go somewhere to get clean, but for all intents and purposes, the car just does what it does. Person, not necessary. People write the code, but after the code is written, that's it, right? I'm making the point that the driver of that car gets fired. All of the drivers of the taxis, all of the drivers of the people who are in those trucks, all of those people get fired. And there is every impetus in the world to fire those people. You don't necessarily need them driving trucks 24 hours. A computer would do that. Wouldn't bat an eye over it. Not going to fall asleep, not going to be pre-concerned about his girlfriend, not going to be trying to change the computer music. You don't even need to have that stuff in the truck. Meaning, you save money on the materials. The software update, for the most part, allows you to add additional capabilities of the system without you having to actually physically, materially add those things. And you create a system that is basically automated, with the people themselves not being a part of it. Now, 200,000 people, let's say that many, are involved in the transportation industry, and maybe more than that. They lose their jobs. When they lose their jobs, what happens? What are you going to do to replace that income? What about in retail? What about in the job that I worked at before I started doing this? I built systems that basically got rid of 3 people that was at the office. Even this thing called a precog, where it was looking into the information and everything else, and it would give the people information that they would need in the next hour, next 2 hours. Now, beforehand, there was 2-3 people that would do this in the mornings. My system, what I built, did it better than any person could do. It was more accurate, it was more on point, and it was faster. And those people were able to be used for something else. I'm making a point that that system was minor, and that update, that change, was minor but drastic. Same thing with making a mail system. Again, cuts down on the work, but in cutting down on the work, you cut on the number of people that are necessary for that task. I'm making the point that throughout your society, as it becomes cheaper to do those things, and as labor becomes more expensive, because labor will become more expensive. If you want $15 an hour minimum wage, what people should have, I would even argue people should get more than that. Well, that has to come from somewhere, right? And if the employer is paying for that money, well, the employer has just increased their cost of doing business, which is either going to come out of their pocket or they're going to increase costs for people who are coming in. Now, many people would not care about paying an extra $1 or extra 20 cents for a hamburger if the employee is making that decent money. The capitalist, however, doesn't want to raise prices. He believes that not raising prices makes his product better than other people. So there is an impetus for him not to do that. Not to mention, he doesn't want to cut into his own profits. The moment that it gets leveled or expensive enough, the burger flipping robot might actually end up being cheaper. And if that robot is 5 cents cheaper, he's going to fire all of those employees over time. And over time, there will be a burger flipping robot sitting there with a hat on, flipping burgers. No employee required. What happened to those people? How are those people going to live? This is kind of what I'm getting into. There is nothing wrong at all with the technological society. And each of us in this country, on this planet, should want technology to be used to the better interests of humanity. Meaning, the key problem for humanity has always been who's going to do the work. If I need to eat, if I need to have a house, if I need to have clean air, if I need to be able to drink water, I need to be able to do the work to make reality those things, bring those things into reality, to manifest those things. And it takes labor to do those things. Who does the work? Me as the individual, am I going to do it? Am I going to get somebody else to do it? And the moment that you get software and computer and technological capability and you get science and all of these other things, then the question of who does the work becomes obvious. The machines should do the work. The entire point of technology is allowing humanity to not have to delve into these things that, yes, currently being done by humans, but can be better done by robots and machinery. The question and the real reality to this is we don't need each and every person working at a job. And many of these jobs are bullshit jobs anyway. And the reality of it is the bullshit jobs hang around in part because our consciousness as a public doesn't deal with this notion of some people working and some people not. It seems radically unfair that there would be people who would necessarily work that may be able-bodied. So the idea of giving people a UBI and not having those people work, even though, no, we don't necessarily need everybody working. From the consciousness of the nation, we can't deal with that thought. As UBI, as machines and AI and as technology starts replacing many of the workers, you can see it in the stores now, where the checkout counters become less and less and less. The kiosks in the other countries take the place of people at the checkout counters from the standpoint of fast food. Retail is not going to be away from this. Even software, the people who build the software, they build systems to make their jobs obsolete. So I'm saying that this is going to be something that sweeps through your society. No, it's not going to get rid of every particular job. And technology is not necessarily going to be able to have a way to do every particular thing. But from the standpoint of profit, the profit motive in and of itself pushes and compels that technological change. In part, at least the technological change in the way that profit can be accrued higher to the top and workers become deprioritized. That change in society is coming. And unless workers have a political solution to that, then they're going to be left in dire straits. Meaning, if your country and your society still looks at work and still looks at Everybody has to work. Each and every person has to work. And people are lazy if they don't. And I don't want my money going to the healthcare. And I don't want my going to Social Security. And I don't want my money going to this. And so everybody has to have a job, whether or not those people are in good straits to have a job. If you can't break that and you can't get past that, then your society is always going to have issues. Because as people start to lose jobs and as technology starts to take these jobs, then the question is going to be, what are these people going to do? What are they going to do? The idea that the truck driver is going to learn code is baloney. I don't buy that. Yeah, I don't buy that. I'm just saying we have a crux, we have an issue that we need to deal with that is conceptual. Technology should be a gateway. All of us should be happy and proud that technology would take the place of a person flipping burger or dropping flies or driving a car for 20-something hours. I love that. But the problem is if the machine is doing the labor, who's making the profit? And the fact of the matter is the profit is being sucked up that much further, that much faster to the top, while the employees and the people who are working at those jobs, through no fault of their own, have lost that job. And that is going to take place in mass. We need to have a political solution to this. And part of the political solution is having people, in part, own the means of production. And I get it. That's not necessarily an easy thing to push for. But public owned companies, the ability for the people themselves to own the companies to which they work for and make the decisions about those companies, I think that's a positive thing. Having some level of interest in the company, I mean, the people who are working there have some kind of leeway and say so. I get that so-and-so started a company. By the same token, if so-and-so have 1,000 people working there to make that company work and to make that company successful, so-and-so didn't do it by himself. Those employees should have a stake in that company that goes beyond just their wage, their paycheck. We need to change how we view our society and how we view ourselves in that society, for that matter, even how we view technology. Technology can be a freeing situation. You could have the government have a, I don't know what you want to call it, beautification committee. I don't know. And when the government creates a beautification committee, it has a job. Beautify America. Make sure the bridges are up to date. Make sure the buildings are straightforward. Make sure, you can even go so far as make sure people have houses, because homelessness is not necessarily the most sightly of things. So you even have the commission to do that. Making sure people have food. So you can build these, take these old warehouses and factories and convert them into greenery. Meaning, use technology to basically have a warehouse that has been converted into plants, edible plants, where you don't have huge amount of human interaction and the machine and the technology basically does most of the work. This gets rid of food deserts and get rid of those areas where people don't have access to food or can't afford food, especially greens. I am making the point that we have all sorts of capabilities at our disposal to deal with many of the issues that are in our society we choose just not to. And that stimulus bill is a good example of that. If you're looking for an experiential example of your society not giving a shit about you, meaning from the standpoint of your government, and have become so detached that they think this, in the context of an event larger magnitude than the Great Depression, is adequate, and will argue that it should be acceptable. I don't think it's adequate. I don't think it's acceptable. I think we're going down the wrong path. I don't think our country, from the standpoint of our government, respects or gives a shit about us in this country, yet at least I've seen nothing to give me any indication of such. And this is just another example. We have problems that we need to solve. And it doesn't seem like our political system is capable of doing that. And that, yeah, it's not necessarily the greatest thing. It's worrying and it's disconcerting. I'll leave it here. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Make sure you hit the subscription button. Make sure you hit the notification bell, all the good stuff. See you guys later.